Chapter 53. Along the way, Fan Xian had arranged for Tung Zijing to sit in his carriage, so these words were not hidden from him. Frowning, he said, "This is too much of a coincidence. I had just arrived in the capital, and I shouldn't have gotten into a fight with anyone. Yet Xija followed me all day, and when the fight broke out in the restaurant, Crown Prince Jing happened to be there. This kind of coincidence is hard to explain." Tung Zijing laughed. The young master may be rude and unreasonable, but he is not a bad person. The second wife would not dare let him handle such a thing. He continued, "The second wife only has one son, and he is not good at studying or martial arts. All he does is eat and drink and go around showing off. So the second wife looks down on him." A bitter smile appeared on Fan Xian's lips. It's precisely because she knows her son can't be helped that Lady Lu is so cruel to me. Mothers seem to be very stubborn. Lady Lu, she wants the outside world to think that the illegitimate son of the Fan family is just an incompetent, hedonistic son. Tung Zijing said, "Perhaps you don't know this, but whenever the young master goes out, he always causes trouble. So the second wife has him follow you out. She doesn't need to make any arrangements, and you will naturally get caught up in the fight. So you mean that if I go out with him, I will naturally become a hedonistic son in the eyes of the world?" "Correct." Tung Zijing smiled. "The second wife's idea is simple, but it seems to be very effective." Fan Xian laughed. "This Lady Lu is very interesting. She actually thinks that Xija is a black ink pot, and that she might as well mix them together." Interesting. I just didn't expect Crown Prince Jing to be in the restaurant," Tung Zijing replied. "Young master, you handled the situation appropriately. Although your words seem to have offended some of the scholars, all scholars are proud and aloof. The people of the capital may think that you are arrogant, but it is better than thinking that you are incompetent. Is creating public opinion really that important?" Fan Xian laughed. "Is the Fan family really that popular? Is Lady Lu really that simple-minded as a pure woman?" He looked at Tung Zijing. "These are all problems, but they're not my problem." Tung Zijing asked curiously, "Young master, what is your problem?" Fan Xian's beautiful face was distressed. "My problem is, to this day, I still don't know what my fiancée looks like and whether or not she's really sick to death." The carriage stopped in an alley on the side of Tianhe Street. Looking into the distance, the government offices of the various departments were still open for business. The eaves of the buildings were like phoenixes pointing to the sky. At the furthest point, there was a square house with nothing special, standing there, looking very gloomy. Fan Xian did not let Tung Zijing follow him. Although it seemed that Tung Zijing had already made up his mind to bet his future on Fan Xian knew that he was not Song Chili. He did not have the ability to subdue people. After all, Tung Zijing was his father's personal follower, so there were some things that Fan Xian could not let him know. In front of a stall selling Tonghalu, he confirmed the location of the Overwatch Council. He bought a stick and chewed on it as he walked, chewing on it until his teeth were about to fall off. It was so satisfying. Passing by a bookstore, he walked in and looked around. He found that it was filled with historical collections that had been read countless times. He called over the clerk and asked in a low voice, "Do you have Story of the Stone?" A strange smile appeared on the clerk's face, and he replied in a very low voice, "Please follow me, sir." There was no need to avoid people. In a small compartment next to the main hall, the clerk took out a set of books and handed them to Fan Xian. Fan Xian took a look. It was exactly the same as the one he had bought from the ante earlier that day. He nodded in satisfaction and paid for the book. "Leave the books here. Someone from Fan Manor will come to pick them up later." The first book had already been taken back to Fan Manor by his sister. These books were too heavy for him, so Fan Xian planned to have the servants come to pick them up later. The clerk was troubled. Which Fan Manor? Count Sinan's manor. Fan Xian wondered if there were more Fan Manors. He really didn't know. The Fan clan was a large clan in the capital, and Count Sinan was only a concubine. It was only in the last decade or so that because of the old lady, they had flourished and become the most famous of the Fan clan. The clerk replied respectfully, wrapped up the books, and put them on the counter. Fan Xian casually asked a few more questions about how the book was selling. After getting the answers, he cursed the bootleg bookseller in his heart. Seeing that the customer did not leave immediately after buying the books, the clerk could only smile and chat with him. During this question and answer, the tip of Fan Xian's ears moved imperceptibly. As he smiled and chatted with the clerk, he slowly circulated his jinqi. His hearing suddenly became more acute, and he immediately found the sound he was looking for in the quiet environment of the bookstore. Their breathing was different from that of the common people. The breathing sounds were long and distant, and it was obvious that they were people with jinqi. Fan Xian knew that these were people sent by his father to protect or monitor him, and he frowned. The clerk saw the customer suddenly frown. Although he felt that the frown of this beautiful young man was also very beautiful, he thought that he had said something wrong and couldn't help but feel uneasy. Leaving the bookstore through the back door, Fan Xian confirmed that he had successfully shaken off the two attendants behind him. He felt a little proud of himself, thinking about the things he had learned from Fei Jie when he was young. Apart from using poison, he had also learned anti-stalking skills. They had finally come in handy. He followed the crowd on Tianhe Street, walking along the flagstones, looking at the buildings on both sides of the street. These buildings were ancient, especially in front of them. On each side of the road was a gentle stream of water. If one wanted to get to the yamen from the road, they would have to cross the small wooden bridge over the stream. The water was as smooth as a mirror, reflecting the shadow of the bridge and the branches of the green trees that stretched over the water. It looked very serene and beautiful. Occasionally, petals from the peach blossom bushes in the distance would be blown off by the wind, floating on the water. He walked along the side of the road, looking at the falling water under his feet. A satisfied smile appeared on his lips. In the few days he had been in the capital, he had always thought about complicated things. It was a far cry from his original intention of experiencing life, and his mind was a little tired. Now that he had been refreshed by the capital's spring scenery, he suddenly felt much better. Arriving at the entrance of the Overwatch Council, Fan Xian frowned as he looked at the limestone building. He felt that this yamen was a little too ugly and did not match the antique buildings around it. But when he thought of Fei Jie's ugly face, he had no choice but to admit it. It was true that the building suited the person. Walking into the building, Fan Xian found it strange that the officials and passers-by all around him were looking at him. Or rather, they were looking at him with strange eyes. He carefully looked at himself to make sure that there was nothing that could attract attention. And then he raised his head, but the curious gazes around him did not change. Chapter 54. Grabbing hold of a passing scribe, Fan Xian looked at his lifeless face. For some reason, Fan Xian felt a little nervous, but at the same time, he felt a sense of familiarity. It was as if he had found the old comrade Fei Jie. He smiled sweetly and greeted him. "Hello." The owner of the lifeless face, like the rest of the people in the Overwatch Council, looked at Fan Xian with a strange expression. After a while, he said hello. These two words were said a little stiffly. Fan Xian swallowed and smiled. This is very presumptuous of me, but why is everyone staring at me? The man laughed, revealing his pale white teeth. He found this young man with a shy smile very interesting. He asked, if a stranger suddenly appeared in a place where no stranger had ever entered, wouldn't everyone stare at him? Fan Xian suddenly understood, but then he was confused. Isn't this the yamen of the Overwatch Council? Has no stranger ever come to the government to handle official business? The man pointed outside the door and kindly explained, "Look over there." Fan Xian took a look and saw that there was no one at the entrance of the Overwatch Council. The people on the street were walking along the other side of the street. The man laughed, but it was a horrifying smile. The old skin on his cheeks wrinkled together. The people of the capital have always avoided our yamen. As for official business, we, the Overwatch Council, never handle official business. His Majesty has decreed that the other 6 yamens are not allowed to get involved in the affairs of the council, so we have never had any dealings with the other yamens. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. So that's how it is. It seems that I really am a reckless trespasser. The man asked curiously, "You don't know what the Overwatch Council does?" Fan Xian replied, I know a little. After all, he was a student of Fei Jie of the 3rd Bureau of the Overwatch Council. He knew a little about the Overwatch Council's functions. And yet you dared to barge in like this. The man shrugged. Most people would think of this place as Yama's palace. Fan Xian smiled helplessly. Perhaps it's because I saw Yama when I was very young. The man laughed and patted his shoulder. Very good, very good. The skin on Fan Xian's right shoulder under his clothes grew a little goosebumps. He felt that the man's tone was like Sun Earn-Yang's. Is there anything I can help you with? The man smiled. Fan Xian immediately felt as if the man had turned into a hotel receptionist from his previous life who spoke in English. He shook his head to get rid of this untimely distraction. He took out a piece of silver from his sleeve and handed it over. Is Fei Jie here? He asked politely. The man was stunned. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Immediately after, Fan Xian noticed that the man's expression was no longer indifferent, but respectful with a hint of fear. Are you looking for Master Fei? As he said this, he flicked his finger beautifully, sending the silver pieces Fan Xian had stuffed into his sleeve back into Fan Xian's sleeve. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. He knew that while this move seemed simple, it was actually very beautiful. At the very least, he had been immersed in martial arts for over a decade to be able to be so accurate. Only now did he realize that this seemingly ordinary Overwatch Council official was actually a hidden ace. Fan Xian nodded, admitting that he had come to find Fei Jie. He then noticed that the man was vigorously wiping the right hand that had patted his shoulder. Master Fei is not here, the man replied politely. He discreetly took a few steps back, putting some distance between himself and Fan Xian. Master Fei has gone to the border to supervise. Fan Xian slapped his forehead. Only now did he remember that Teng Zijing had said that the director of the Overwatch Council would be returning home for at least 3 months. Given Fei Jie's lazy temper, the only person who could control him was not here, so naturally he would slip away. He excused himself from the man and prepared to leave. Before he left, Fan Xian suddenly smiled and asked, "Sir, what is your name?" "I am Wang Qinian." The Overwatch Council official, Wang Qinian, saw that this young man, with a slightly bashful smile, dared to come to the Overwatch Council alone and call Master Fei Jie by his name. He knew that this young man was no ordinary person, so he called himself I. Fan Xian knew that when the man heard that he was looking for Fei Jie, he unconsciously associated him with something dangerous like poison. That was why he wiped his hand and retreated. He looked at Wang Qinian with a smile. If Master Fei returns, please inform him that his student has come to the capital. Fei Jie's student? Wang Qinian felt the urge to chop off his own right hand. He silently cursed himself for his fondness for touching things. He coughed and agreed. Walking out of the Overwatch Council's main gate, the sun shone down through the tall trees on either side of the road. The shadows of countless leaves enveloped Fan Xian's body. He walked west for a while and sat on the railing next to the running water. He rested his hands on the sides of his body and looked at the crowd on the street. For a moment, he didn't know where to go. He didn't want to go back to Fan Manor. Although there was a gentle and kind sister there, when he thought of Lady Lu, his father, and that chubby boy who should have been happily studying every day but was now forced to compete with him, he felt a little uncomfortable. What belonged to him, he bravely fought for it. He would not give up. However, Fan Xian was still not sure what truly belonged to him in this world. After all, he had experienced another life before, and there was always a sense of distance between him and this world. He hid the fact that he had come to the Overwatch Council to find Fei Jie from his father. Although his father knew that Fei Jie was his teacher, Fan Xian still felt that Fei Jie was more trustworthy. Perhaps it was because he had not been in this world for long, and had begun following old Fei around looking for corpses, which gave him a sense of closeness. Fei Jie's teacher was not in the capital. This fact made the arrangements he had made before entering the capital a little problematic. So he was thinking about what he should do next. As he thought about these things, he jumped down from the railing and began a walk back. When he passed by the Overwatch Council again, he noticed that the people on the street were indeed walking on the right side of the street, avoiding the council's main gate. It was as if they were afraid of the sinister aura that seeped out of the building. He squinted at the entrance of the building. The thin clouds in the sky suddenly parted, and the clear sunlight shone down. His eyes were blinded by a golden light. Rubbing his eyes, he looked towards the golden light and found that there was a wide tablet in front of the Overwatch Council. It looked like a crouching tiger crouching on the ground. The tablet was made of stone, and a few words were written on it. Fan Xian frowned. He felt that these words were somewhat familiar, as if he had seen them somewhere before. But no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't figure out where they had come from. His gaze moved downwards, and he saw the inscription. It was a somewhat unfamiliar, but incomparably familiar name. Chapter 55. Yi Qingmei. Fan Xian was incomparably shocked. Unconsciously, he quietly said the name. He could never have imagined that his mother's name would appear on the stone tablet in front of the Overwatch Council. His face remained calm, but his heart was in turmoil. Why would his mother's name appear on the stone tablet in front of the Overwatch Council? Although Miss Yi had been the wealthiest woman in the world, she could not have enjoyed such treatment that not even the emperor could. Furthermore, his mother's mysterious death must have had something to do with the nobility of the kingdom of Qing. Although Wu Zhu had said that the Yi family's enemies had all been killed in the storm 10 years ago, who could guarantee that the relatives of those enemies were not left behind in the court? Even now, Yi Qingmei was clearly a taboo name. The Yi family's wealth had all been transferred to the palace treasury, and the Yi family's business had become royal merchants. The Overwatch Council had brazenly put Yi Qingmei's name in front of their door. Although Wu Zhu had said that few people in the world knew that his mother was called Yi Qingmei, the royal family of the kingdom of Qing must have known. Director Chun was a bit too bold. Did he not care about the royal family's reputation? However, after seeing the short stone tablet, Fan Xian finally understood what Uncle Wu Zhu had said in Danzhou. Not many people know that the young lady was called Yi Qingmei. The people around her just called her young lady. But the name Yi Qingmei, even now, is very famous in the capital. Fan Xian rubbed his hands and walked forward with his head down. He thought that with such a tablet in front of the Overwatch Council that everyone in the capital feared, it would be difficult for the name Yi Qingmei not to be famous. All these mental activities happened in a very short period of time. He restrained the expression on his face, pulled up his sleeves, and expressionlessly walked east, as if he did not see the name. It was because he saw the tablet that Fan Xian could not help but think of the prime minister's daughter he was about to marry. According to his father, her mother, the eldest princess, was now in charge of the Yi family's business. If there was anything in this world that he felt he should have, this business would be at the top of the list. It was a very strange feeling. From Tung Zijing, Fan Xian had already found out where Miss Lin lived. But knowing her background and identity, and knowing that the capital was a place of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, he did not dare to sneak off to spy on her. He had come to the Overwatch Council to find teacher Fei Jia. He wanted to use the Overwatch Council's heaven-defying methods to find a way to meet the woman who was entangled in Mion's sickbed. At the same time, he wanted to ask Fei Jia to help take a look at the girl's condition. Unexpectedly, Fei Jia was not in the capital. Fan Xian was a little annoyed. Did he really have to wait until they consummated their marriage to find out what Fei Jia looked like? No, he warned himself. He had to find a way to peep. If something went wrong, he would have time to prepare for his escape. As he walked, Fan Xian became even more annoyed. He had just arrived in the capital, and he was completely unfamiliar with the roads. He walked back and forth on Tiana Avenue twice, but he couldn't find where his family's carriage was. Coincidentally, he saw a child holding a stick of candied hawthorn and was chewing on it as he walked. Taking a whiff of the sweet smell, Fan Xian felt it to be very familiar. He rushed forward, snatched it, and took a bite. Based on the taste, he confirmed that it was from the same stall as the one he had eaten before. Only then did he ask where the stall was. The child was frightened. He thought he had run into a candied hawthorn robber. Finally, Fan Xian calmed down with 2 copper coins and pointed him in a direction. Fan Xian followed the direction and walked for a long time. Sadly, he found that the child was taking revenge on him. This place was clearly not where he should be. He was already at the edge of the capital. Fan Xian did not know this, Otherwise, he would have been very proud of the strength of his legs and sad about his intelligence. This place was very desolate. There was a temple in the bustling capital. To find such a desolate place was not an easy task. To say it was desolate was not accurate. To be precise, it was unusually clean. Not a speck of dust could be seen on the pillars and eaves of the temple. He raised his head to look at the black wooden structure in front of him. He couldn't help but think of the Temple of Heaven in his previous life in Beijing. The temple in front of him was much smaller. It seemed to have less of a mysterious connection to the heavens and more of a worldly elegance. The front door was painted dark black. It looked very dignified. On the door was a flat horizontal board with the words, Temple of Qing, written on it. Fan Xian licked the sugar off his teeth. Looking at the two sacred yellow words above his head, an indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. This was the Temple of Qing. According to legend, the only place in the kingdom of Qing that could communicate with the illusory temple, the temple where the royal family worshipped heaven. Back in Danzhou, Fei Jie had said that the Temple of Heaven was 3 li away from the palace in the capital. Fan Xian had always thought it was 3 li away from the palace. He had no idea that 3 li away was actually a place. Fan Xian's mouth fell open. Before he came to the capital, he had thought that since no one in this world could find the temple, he had to go to the Temple of Heaven to take a look. He didn't know if he could find the answer to the question that had been haunting him for 16 years. Why did he come to this world? In the novels he read in his previous life, Xiang Xiaolong had a reason. Later on, the transmigrators also had a reason. Later on, there was no need for a reason. But Fan Xian himself was deeply puzzled. He needed a reason that could explain why he had been reborn into this world when he was clearly dead. He had never imagined that the child's random directions would lead him to the Temple of Qing. This realization made him feel slightly dizzy. Perhaps there was some kind of mysterious connection between him and the temple. There was some kind of miraculous fate. He firmly believed in this. He firmly believed in the fate brought about by a stick of Tonghalu. Stepping forward, Fan Xian was surrounded by silence. He gently pushed open the heavy wooden door that seemed to have not been opened for many years. Stop! A loud shout came. Chapter 56. Fan Xian was startled. He had thought this place was sacred and quiet, but suddenly there was such a roar. Looking carefully, he realized that there was someone inside the temple. The person blocking his way was a middle-aged man with sunken eyes and a hooked nose. He looked very sinister. Seeing the man staring at him, Fan Xian felt a little unhappy. He thought about the classics and history he had read. According to the rules of the royal city, the Temple of Qing was a place that everyone could come to. Not only did this man hide behind the door to scare people, but he also put on a posture like an eagle hunting a rabbit. Who the hell would want to be a rabbit? Fan Xian frowned. Sir, your voice is so loud. Are you not afraid of deafening us? Unexpectedly, the middle-aged man's expression was unusually serious. He pushed Fan Xian forward and said in a low voice, Leave quickly. There are people in the temple who are praying. Do not disturb them. The man was clearly dressed as a follower of a wealthy family, but his tone was very official. Fan Xian did not notice this. Ever since he had dug graves with teacher Fei as a child, he had developed a slight obsession with cleanliness. Seeing the hand coming closer and closer, he frowned and crossed his hands, twisting them around the man's wrist. There was a light snap. The two men, one big and one small, looked at each other in surprise. They found that their methods were very similar. It was like two snakes intertwining, unable to tear each other apart. The middle-aged man let out a light sound. His eyes shone brightly, and a hidden force flowed out like a great river, attacking Fan Xian's body from his wrist. Fan Xian grunted. He had not expected to run into such an expert. He felt a burning sensation on his back, and the tyrannical Jinshi that had been quiet for many years reacted in an instant. It shot out from his dantian and met the man's attack head-on. There was a soft hum. The dust on the stone steps was blown up by the collision of the two hidden forces, forming a strange gray ball that quickly dispersed. The two men were shaken several steps apart. The middle-aged man covered his mouth and coughed. Fan Xian's face was expressionless, as if there was no problem. The middle-aged man looked at him coldly. So young, and yet you have such tyrannical Xinqi. Which family are you from? Why do you care who I am? I only want to enter the temple to pray. Or why do you have to stop me? Fan Xian looked at him coldly. There is a noble in the temple. Young man, wait for a moment. The middle-aged man felt that his opponent's technique was similar to his own. He thought that his opponent might be a disciple of some great family in the capital, and that he was acquainted with him. That was why he gradually dispersed the killing intent in his heart. A hint of a smile flashed in Fan Xian's eyes. In the laws of the kingdom of Qing, there is no rule stating that one needs to line up to worship the temple. The middle-aged man furrowed his brows. He felt that this young man was very annoying. With a wave of his sleeve, he entered the temple, leaving Fan Xian outside. Fan Xian opened his mouth to speak, but his chest felt stuffy and his throat tasted sweet. He quickly pulled out a handkerchief from his sleeve and covered his mouth. Fortunately, at the critical moment when the hidden forces collided, his right index finger quietly flicked the opponent's pulse. It was all because his understanding of the human body structure was more profound than that of these martial arts masters. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would have suffered more serious injuries. At this moment, when he looked at the heavy wooden door again, there was an additional trace of fear in his eyes. He no longer dared to try to push this seemingly immovable door. Fan Xian coughed twice. A trace of determination appeared on his handsome face. Since he could not beat the opponent, he could only retreat and wait for another day to fight. Just as he turned to leave, he found that the wooden door behind him had opened again. The middle-aged master who had injured him stood at the door and said coldly, "The master has ordered that the young man should go to the side hall to pray. Do not enter the main hall." After saying this, he added, "Do not enter the main hall. Do you hear me?" Fan Xian turned around and looked at the middle-aged man. He then looked at the seemingly unfathomable and eerie temple of Qing. His brows furrowed, and with a wave of his sleeves, he stepped over the high threshold and walked in the direction of the side hall without turning his head. Seeing that the young man, after this setback, was still unhurried and unafraid, and still persisted in his original goal, a trace of admiration flashed in the middle-aged master's eyes. The middle-aged man closed the temple door and furrowed his brows as he looked around. These little bastards actually let the young man walk to the temple door. He had to train them well when he returned tonight. The temple of Qing was a quiet place. The people of Qing were a very realistic people. If the common people wanted to pray, they would rather go to the Dongshan temple to the west of the capital to pray to the child-giving goddess and the immortals who looked like rich landlords. But the people of Qing respected and feared the heavens. The emperor was the so-called son of heaven, so the temple of Qing became a place for the royal family to worship the heavens. Although the temple of Qing was still open to the common people of the capital, no common people liked the heavy pressure of the strict atmosphere. The main hall of the temple of Qing was the building that looked like the temple of heaven. It had 2 layers of round eaves and was very beautiful. The middle-aged man stood respectfully outside the main hall, looking at the nobleman who was holding his hands behind his back and admiring the colorful paintings on the wall. He said in a low voice, "According to the master's wishes, the young man should go to the side hall." The nobleman was about 40 years old. His face could not be said to be heroic, but his eyes had a disdainful expression. It was only a trace of exhaustion that was difficult to detect. Which family does that young man belong to be able to exchange blows with you? The nobleman asked with a smile. The middle-aged man was very skilled in martial arts, but in front of the nobleman, he really was like a follower. He answered honestly, "I do not know. I just reported to the master. The way he walks is similar to the way of the guards in the family." The nobleman was a bit surprised. "Oh, could it be the boy from the Li family?" The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. "Although I've always been too lazy to deal with people, I still know Crown Prince Jing." "Oh." The nobleman made another sound and turned his head to look at the frescoes on the wall. He had too many things to consider every day, and it was rare for him to have such leisure time. He did not want to be disturbed by such trivial matters. Earlier, he had allowed the young man to enter the side hall to pray purely, because he felt that it was a good thing for the country to have more young talents. The middle-aged man quietly stood guard outside the hall, his eyes occasionally glancing at the side hall. After a long time, there was a commotion outside the hall. The nobleman suddenly frowned. Why is the girl not resting in the back? What's she doing in the side hall? The middle-aged man was slightly surprised. He used all his strength to listen in that direction. He raised his head in shame. The princess has gone to the side hall. The nobleman frowned. Nonsense. He suddenly thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. Go take a look. Also, bring that young man to me. Yes. The middle-aged man accepted the order and was about to leave. Suddenly, there was the sound of a bird outside the Temple of Qing. The temple door was pushed open, and a hurried man ran in. He handed the nobleman a sealed letter. Chapter 57. Fan Xian walked in the direction of the side hall with his head down. Out of the corner of his eye, he looked at the altar of heaven in the main hall. He was curious as to who was praying there to be able to order around that middle-aged master. He knew that the person's background was unfathomable, and he only wanted to come to the Temple of Qing to take a look, so there was no need to fight over this, even though his name was Fan Xian. His right hand was still covering his mouth, and he coughed occasionally. Earlier, he had used Jinshi to travel around his abdomen and confirm that his body had not suffered any substantial damage. It was just that when the Jinshi had reversed, it had ruptured the fragile membrane between his throat, not his lungs or upper bronchial tubes. He coughed as he walked. Looking at the spots of blood on the white handkerchief, he thought of Lin Daiyu, Su Mengjin, Zhou Yu, Lin Qinan, and many other elders. Forget about Lin Qinan. She was not as poignant as the other three. By the time he reached the side hall, his Jinshi had already healed most of the small injury. Fan Xian regretfully put away the handkerchief, looked back at the altar of heaven, and walked into the side hall. The side hall was a slightly smaller temple, surrounded by a green stone wall. There was no one inside. Fan Xian found that he did not see the legendary ascetic monks, and felt slightly disappointed. He walked into the hall and was even more disappointed to find that there were no statues of the gods he had seen in his previous life. But thinking about it, this was normal. Since they were worshipping the sky, no one would know what the sky looked like. In the middle of the temple, there was an incense burner. It was very wide, and there was a light yellow satin hanging down to the ground, covering the green stone floor below. On top of the incense burner was an exquisite porcelain incense burner. There were 3 sticks of incense stuck in the burner, and most of the incense sticks had already burned away. The entire room was enveloped in a calming fragrance. Fan Xian wandered around the hall, his eyes sweeping over the colored paintings on the walls. He found that the style of the paintings was very similar to the oil paintings of later generations. But the gods in the paintings, standing on mountain peaks, floating on the surface of the sea, or sitting on volcanoes, did not have real faces. They were slightly blurry and deformed, as if the painter had purposely arranged them this way. He took a look and found that these murals only talked about ancient myths that had been mentioned in the scriptures. Among them, there was content about Yu the Great controlling the flood. There were also some other things. However, no matter how Fan Xian looked at them, they did not match up with the scriptures. He shook his head and gave up on the idea of finding some answers from the incense burner. He found a prayer mat at the side of the hall and threw it in front of the incense burner. He ran down, put his palms together, closed his eyes, and faced the green smoke curling up from the incense burner. His lips moved slightly as he prayed incessantly. In his previous life, Fan Xian was naturally an atheist. In this life, Fan Xian was a firm believer in theism. This change happened very naturally. Anyone who encountered such a strange experience would probably have the same psychological change as him. That was why he knelt and prayed piously, hoping that the ethereal heavens and the traceless temple would be able to explain why he had come to this world. At the same time, he prayed even more piously for the heavens to give him a lot of silver and a very peaceful life. The seemingly tangible green smoke suddenly dissipated. The tip of Fan Xian's ears trembled slightly, as if he had heard something. He opened his eyes in disbelief and looked at the small, slightly trembling porcelain burner on the incense burner. He was incomparably shocked. Could it be that his seemingly pious, but actually absent-minded prayer had actually been detected by the heavens? His gaze rested on the wide incense burner, and Fan Xian finally discovered the root of the problem. A bright light flashed through his eyes. His left hand pressed against the boot that concealed the dagger. Slowly but firmly, he extended his right hand and pulled back the cloth that hung below the incense burner. After the cloth was pulled back, what fell into Fan Xian's eyes was a scene that made him very surprised. A girl wearing a white dress with the right hem was squatting in a corner of the incense burner, looking at Fan Xian in surprise. The girl's eyes were very large and soft, like the surface of a quiet lake that would make one fall into a deep sleep forever. Her facial features were exquisite and beautiful, with light pink skin and long eyelashes. She looked like someone walking out of a painting. Fan Xian was startled, and his gaze rested on her face. Gradually, he realized that the girl's forehead was a little big, her nose was a little sharp, and her skin was a little too white. Her lips seemed to be a little thicker than the average beauty's, and there were still many imperfections. But when put together, coupled with a slightly timid expression and a natural shyness, Fan Xian's heart still moved. He was moved. The girl looked curiously at this young man who was piously praying to the heavens. She realized that his face was unexpectedly beautiful, elegant, and otherworldly. Even his eyelashes were so long. She couldn't help but stare at him a few more times. After looking, the girl felt that something was wrong. A faint red smear quickly spread across both sides of her cheeks, and then quickly spread. Unexpectedly, even the roots of her ears had turned red. But she still couldn't bear to look away. She was curious in her heart. Whose family was this young man outside, to be so handsome? It was quiet in the corner of the Qing temple. Fan Xian's hand continued to hold that piece of muslin. His gaze continued to linger on the girl's face, and the girl gathered her courage to look at him. They looked at each other like this. After an indeterminable amount of time, it was still silent. Fan Xian's gaze gently brushed over the girl's face. Finally, the girl couldn't help but slowly lower her head. Fan Xian's gaze finally fell on the girl's lips. Only then did he realize that her lips were abnormally shiny. He looked at her again curiously and found a reason. It was the reason that he remembered for a long time after the incident. The girl was holding an oily chicken drumstick in her hand, and the oil on her lips was obviously from eating the drumstick. Such a beautiful and otherworldly woman in white was hiding under the incense table of the Temple of Qing, secretly eating a chicken leg. This strong contrast made Fan Xian's mouth drop open, and he couldn't speak for a long time. After a long time, there was finally a sound in the quiet and awkward silence of the incense table. "You, who are you?" The beautiful man and woman spoke at the same time. Even their slightly trembling voices were very similar. It was the first time Fan Xian had heard the girl's voice. He felt that it was soft and powerless. It was a very comfortable feeling, but also very confusing. His chest tightened, and he actually spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing him spit out blood, the girl was startled, but not because she was afraid. Her eyes naturally showed a strong sense of pity, as if all the pain Fan Xian had suffered was pain in her heart. Seeing her worry for him, Fan Xian's heart warmed. He smiled and comforted her. "It's nothing. Vomiting and vomiting will become a habit." Chapter 58. The wind comes from the south and flies into my bosom. The flower bud in my bosom blooms for a gentleman. The zither and the zither are hard to keep company, and the years press on. Those who give me the papaya will be rewarded with the jasper. Hearing this new witticism, the girl's worried eyes flashed with a hint of a smile. Fan Xian smiled at her and said softly, "Do you still want to hide inside?" The girl shyly shook her head. At that moment, a voice came from outside. "Miss, where did you run off to?" The girl's face darkened. She knew she had to leave. Fan Xian also knew that they must be looking for her. Looking at her expression, he felt a sense of loss, as if afraid that after today's separation, he would never be able to find the girl again. He hurriedly asked, "Will you come back tomorrow?" She shook her head, her expression a little gloomy. Are you a family member of the nobleman in the main hall? Fan Xian probed. The girl thought for a moment and smiled. She didn't answer him. Instead, she crawled out of the incense table and ran out like a gust of wind. Before she left the temple, she looked back at Fan Xian and the chicken leg in her hand. She cutely stuck out her tongue, thinking that if her uncle saw this, he would certainly scold her again. She rolled her eyes and ran back, handing the chicken leg to Fan Xian. She smiled and waved her hand, then ran out of the temple. She never came back. Fan Xian blankly knelt on the prayer mat, confirming that the girl he saw earlier was not a fairy sent by heaven. He looked down at the chicken leg in his hand and laughed foolishly. He decided in his heart that even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground, he would find this girl in the capital. If she wasn't betrothed, no, even if she was betrothed to some bastard from another family, he would still snatch her away. When he walked out of the temple with the greasy chicken leg in his hand, he saw a group of carriages heading east. He knew that the girl in white must be in that group. The setting sun shone on the green trees on both sides of the road, making the leaves look like they were on fire. Fan Xian unconsciously raised the chicken leg and took a bite. He suddenly remembered that the chicken leg had also passed by the girl's fragrant lips, and his heart also burned. Chicken drumstick, oh chicken drumstick. You're the luckiest drumstick in the world to be able to let that lady have a bite of it. He was all smiles as he walked toward the center of the capital. He could not find a way back to Fan Manor, but he was in no hurry. In his heart, he was very grateful to the child who had eaten the candied hawthorn. Not far behind him, there was a blind man who he should be thanking. He was holding a bamboo stick as he disappeared into the twilight. Gong Dian's mood was not as good as Fan Xian's. Today, he had accompanied his master out to relax, but he had not expected so many things to happen on the way. First, that unknown youth had managed to sneak past his subordinates and guards and run into the Temple of Qing. Then, that little girl had slipped into the side hall under the watchful eyes of everyone. He really did not know what those old nannies were doing. But he had no place to vent his anger, because the master's face was gloomy, as if he was very angry. It seemed that the encrypted letter had something written that made him very unhappy. Gong Dian, the nobleman in the carriage, called coldly. He had never liked to ride in a sedan chair. This was a habit he had developed 20 years ago. If Chun Ping still does not want to come back, send a team to capture him. Yes, Gong Dian accepted the order, but in his heart, he was secretly complaining. Who could do this job well? Seeing that the carriage had quieted down, Gong Dian let out a secret sigh of relief and relaxed a little. He turned around and saw the dejected guards behind him, which made him furious. Earlier, these guards had been hiding outside the Temple of Qing, who knew that they would all be knocked out, and they could not even see who had done it. And because of this, that youth had been able to so easily enter the heavily guarded Temple of Qing. Gong Dian's brows furrowed as he wondered who had the ability to knock out 8 fifth-ranked guards at the same time without making a sound. This was practically the level of the 4 great grandmasters. What if this person was an assassin? His heart was filled with fear, and he did not dare to continue thinking about it. He knew that when he returned, a secret investigation would begin. The last carriage in the line was different from the others. The windows were decorated with elegant flowers. The girl in white, who had awkwardly looked at Fan Xian in the Temple of Qing, was now leaning back in her seat. She had a faint smile on her lips, as if she was still thinking about something. The serving girl saw that the young lady was rarely so happy, and her mood lightened. She asked, "Miss, did something good happen today?" The young lady smiled. "Every time I come out with my uncle, I'm always happy. At least it's much better than staying in that gloomy room." The serving girl pouted, but the imperial doctor said that the young lady's illness cannot be exposed to the wind. As soon as she heard the word illness, the young lady's expression darkened. She thought of the handsome young man she had met earlier, and her mood improved a little. She thought to herself that she had been born with a bad life, and that she did not have many days left. Should she be happy or sad to meet that person? She then thought of the rumor that involved her, and of that son of Fan Manor. Although her mother was against it, and that strange father seemed to be against it, but who could win against her uncle? Thinking of this, her heart was filled with worry. She felt a sweetness in her chest and quickly pulled a white handkerchief to her lips. After a few coughs, the handkerchief was stained with blood. Seeing this, the serving girl panicked and said in a sobbing voice, vomiting again, "What should I do?" The young lady smiled faintly. Thinking of what the young man had said, she laughed lightly. "What's wrong with that? You'll get used to it if you keep vomiting." The serving girl made a sound of surprise. She didn't understand what she meant and thought that the young lady's illness had made her confused. It was late at night when Fan Xian returned to Fan Manor, battered and exhausted. He made up his mind to tie Tang Zijing to his waist whenever he went out. Dinner had already begun in Fan Manor, and 4 people were waiting for him at the table. He was a little embarrassed, but Count Sinan's face was expressionless. Lady Lu was also smiling warmly, without a trace of bitterness. After Fan Xian explained in a low voice, Fan Ruo laughed. Her brother was too muddle-headed. Even if he couldn't find his own carriage, he could just hire one from a carriage company. Fan Xian didn't even think about the carriage company, so he could only force a smile and endure Fan Xija's mockery. After dinner, the family of 4 began to play mahjong. Fan Xija was like an accountant, watching from the side with an abacus, helping everyone calculate. A trace of sadness flashed in Lady Lu's eyes, but she suppressed her resentment for her son's failure to live up to her expectations. She smiled and chatted with Fan Xian. Chapter 59. After playing a few rounds, Fan Xian's luck was not good, and he was impatient with Lady Lu being so affectionate, so he gave up his seat and patted Fan Xija. Fan Xija timidly glanced at his father, and Count Sinan nodded slightly. Overjoyed, Fan Xian let out a soft cry and jumped onto the stool. This child was usually timid in front of his father. After eating, he would be forced to study, and he would never be allowed to gamble or play cards. He knew that he was allowed to sit at the table today because his father was in a good mood and wanted to give Fan Xian some face. So Fan Xija had a much better impression of his older brother from Danzhou. Fan Xian wandered around the courtyard, and when he returned to the reception hall, he stared dumbfounded at the table. In front of Fan Xija was a pile of copper coins, while the other 3 families had lost almost all of their money. Thinking back to the day in the carriage, this seemingly naughty little brother of his had displayed an unparalleled passion for wealth. Fan Xian finally realized that his little brother was not completely useless. At least when it came to making money, he seemed to have some talent. He stood curiously behind Fan Xija, carefully observing how this 12-year-old boy operated. After watching for a while, he couldn't help but be in awe. He saw that this kid's hands were extremely nimble. He could actually count the tiles with one hand, grab them, draw them, play them, knock them, eat them, win them. His other hand was on the abacus, and his 5 fat fingers plucked at the beads on the abacus, making a popping sound. Fan Xija won all the bets, and the method of calculating the pawns was very complicated, so Fan Xija was the one doing the counting. Fan Xian watched from the side. He always felt that this kid could calculate a lot of money. No wonder there were so many copper coins in front of him. Seeing that Fan Xian was staring at Fan Xija, Lady Lu's expression did not change. She sighed inwardly, thinking that her son's ugly greed for money had been seen by Fan Xian. She was afraid that he would become even more confident. She had no idea how shocked Fan Xian was, because Fan Xian could not see a trace of arrogance or mischief on Fan Xija's face. Instead, there was the kind of resolute and serious light that only an idealist could possess. Fan Xian concluded that the youth in front of him, as long as he was given a chance to display his abilities, would become a very powerful person in the future. But he also knew that in the kingdom of Qing, if he wanted to make a name for himself, the only way was through the imperial examinations. Even if Fan Xija were to inherit the title of nobility due to his family connections, it would be impossible for him to be given an actual position. No wonder Tang Zijing said that Lady Lu hated her son. In this era, merchants were still not valued. The Ministry of Revenue was one thing, the imperial merchant was another, but the merchants of the common people were another. The game ended quickly. and Count Sinan left his seat expressionlessly. This kind of joyous family gathering was not in his nature, but for some reason, today was different from usual. However, as he left, he glanced at Fan Xian. Fan Xian understood something from the look in his father's eyes. It seemed that he was not happy that he had thrown off the guard his father had sent to protect him during the day. Fan Xian smiled and did not respond. After all, he did not like to be followed. Since that was the case, he might as well take action to clarify this point. Lady Lu looked at her son, and her eyes revealed a trace of affection and helplessness. But this emotion was fleeting. She got up and politely bade farewell to Fan Xian and Fan Ruo, then left with her husband. All the servants in Count Sinan's manor knew that the master liked to drink a cup of fruit juice every night before going to bed. This was made by Lady Lu herself to help him sleep as he toiled away at the Ministry of Revenue. Fan Xian frowned. He had wanted to talk to his father about something, but it seemed that he would have to postpone it. He turned his head and saw Fan Cija still bent over the table, recording the numbers. He asked curiously, "Aren't you going to collect the money? What are you recording?" Ruo had been playing mahjong for a while and was tired. She gently stretched her wrists and smiled. He gets guests during the new year. That's when father allows him to play for a while. But every time he wins, he doesn't allow him to keep the copper he wins. He says that a man should not be greedy for such petty gains. Cija doesn't dare go against his father's wishes, but he always records how much he wins. He says that he'll slowly settle accounts with us in the future. Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. The word settle accounts had a different meaning. He steadied his mind and smiled. "Cija, I see that you're good at calculating. What are you going to do when you grow up?" Fan Cija was young, but when it came to keeping accounts, he was very focused. He didn't answer Fan Xian's question. Ruo thought that her brother didn't know her brother's temper and was afraid that he would be unhappy. She prepared to help explain, but then she saw Fan Xian's face full of smiles. He was looking at the young man, keeping accounts with some appreciation. After the accounts were finished, Fan Cija seemed to remember the question Fan Xian had just asked. He scratched his head and frowned. "Of course I'm going to study, become an official, and bring glory to the family." Fan Xian looked at him, amused. "Is that true?" Fan Xija's anger dissipated. He lay on the table and said weakly, "If I don't say it like that, Mother will hear me and give me a good beating. There are only the three of us here. Why don't you just say the truth?" Fan Xian teased. These words fell into Fan Xija's ears, and they gave him a different feeling. He had grown up in the eyes of servants. Most children of officials had strict fathers and kind mothers, but Fan Cija had strict parents. Later, his father asked his sister to discipline him, but she was even stricter. So he was no stranger to the feeling of respect for his younger brother, but he had never experienced it as an older brother. Hearing the words, "the truth," Fan Cija was a little dazed. It seemed that this brother in front of him, who was 4 years older than him, wasn't all that scary. He wasn't like his mother had described him to be. On the contrary, he felt a sense of closeness. I like to make money. What's so good about merchants chasing profit?" Ruo frowned. Fan Xian looked at his sister with disapproval. He was a little disappointed. We've exchanged letters for so many years. How could she still have such strange ideas? Ruoro's heart tightened when he glared at her. She knew she had said something wrong, and she quickly shut her mouth. Fan Xian smiled and looked at Fan Cija. "Whatever it is, just do it well. Making money is the same. I support you. What's the use of your support?" Fan Cija sighed. "You have to get father to say this. Do it secretly." Fan Xian was like a devil trying to tempt him. Fan Xija's spirits rose, and then he thought of something. He said passionately, "Brother, give me the manuscript for that book. I have a way to sell it for a high price." He didn't seem forced to call him brother. Fan Xian was surprised. "Isn't it a bit slow to make money? Are you worried about money?" Fan Cija looked at him with disdain. "I'm just trying." Realizing that the kid dared to look down on him, Fan Xian became angry. "If you want to get the goods, you'll have to show me the proposal first." Chapter 60. What's a proposal? Fan Cija looked at his sister for help. Fan Ruruo blinked and explained, "It's what you're going to do. It's very simple." Fan Xija nodded. Ever since he was a child, he had set a grand goal in his heart. That was why he was able to work hard on these things. Fan Xija's dream was to become the second richest family in the world, the Yi family. But at the time, he didn't know that his brother, who encouraged him, had anything to do with the Yi family. A nanny took Fan Xija to wash up. Only the brother and sister were left in the reception hall. Fan Xian walked out in silence, and Ro followed quietly. The brother and sister tacitly walked along the winding corridor. Just as they were about to reach Ruo's boudoir, they stopped at the edge of the shallow pool. Ruo was the first to speak. "I know there shouldn't be a hierarchy, but I feel that if she really wants to walk that path, it will be very difficult." Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. "A society with people has its own hierarchy. I've told you this before. There's no need to change anything. But the problem is, we can admit that this kind of thing exists, but there's no need to change our own hearts because of its existence." Fan Ruo opened her eyes wide and looked at her brother curiously. "What's your heart? It's not the Tao that those swindlers talk about." Fan Xian patted his chest. "It's just a simple literal meaning. Your heart is what do you want?" He continued, "Everyone only has one life. How should we spend this one life? When we look back on the past, we won't regret the wasted years, and we won't be ashamed of our mediocrity. Before I die, I can proudly say, I've done everything I wanted to do. Even if I didn't succeed, I've tried." Fan Ruo stared at Fan Xian's face with a look of admiration. "I didn't say that," Fan Xian explained awkwardly. "Someone called Ostrovsky said it. That's a strange name. It's like someone from the other side of the sea. Not bad, but I changed the last part. After all, I'm not a noble person. My vision is only focused on the 3 years ahead and the 3 miles ahead. So, if she likes it, then let him work hard. That way, he won't regret it in the future. That's how he acts according to his heart," Fan Ruo said thoughtfully. Fan Xian continued his words and said, "People have to survive. If they can find a way to support themselves, and this method is where their interests lie, this is a relatively ideal state of survival." "Understood." Fan Ruo smiled like a blooming flower. Fan Xian smiled. "Perhaps you haven't noticed the look on Xija's face when he's calculating. That look reminds me of a saying, 'Serious people are the most beautiful.'" Fan Ruo giggled, thinking that her brother's appearance could be called beautiful. Fan Xian sternly lectured, "Don't laugh. In this aspect, you really can't compare to him. At least he clearly knows what he wants in this life. But what about you? Even though the people of the capital call you a talented girl, what do you really want to do? The path of poetry is not a small path. If you really want to put your heart into it, you need to be serious and diligent. Don't just treat it as a pastime." Fan Ruo lowered her head and accepted the lecture. She felt warmth in the depths of her heart. She thought that in the past, these questions and answers between teacher and student had finally become a reality. How happy was that? Moonlight shone down from above, and when it passed through the shallow pond, it shone on the corners of the corridor. Fan Xian's face happened to be shrouded in the light, and his already beautiful face became even more delicate. "Brother is the most beautiful." Fan Ruo looked at him and said in a low voice. Fan Xian didn't hear what she said. Thinking about the scene in the flower hall, he was a little lost in thought. He said to himself, "I hope this house can be quieter. I hope Lady Lu is smart enough not to disappoint me." Just as the two of them were about to part, Fan Xian suddenly thought of the white-clothed girl he had met in the temple of Qing at dusk. Full of anticipation, he described her appearance, thinking that the girl was obviously the daughter of a very wealthy family in the capital. His sister often visited the back gardens of the manors of the nobility in the capital, so he should know something about her. But after hearing her brother's description, Fan Ruo had no clue. She giggled and asked, "What did you meet the fairy? Even your soul was taken away." In her mind, her brother had always been a teacher who was far more mature than his age. This was the first time she had seen him with a disappointed expression on his face, and she couldn't help but be curious about the white-clothed girl. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "If even you don't know her, then it looks like I really won't be able to find her. Although he said this, his heart was firm. He knew that one day he would meet that girl again, eating a chicken drumstick. He suddenly thought of something, and his heart trembled. A stick of candied hawthorn had led him to the Temple of Qing, where he had always wanted to go, and then he had seen that girl. These coincidences made him believe in the word fate. His heart was filled with great anticipation, and he said excitedly, "Do you think it's possible that she is the young lady of the Lin family?" Fan Ruoruo frowned. "I've never seen the young lady of the Lin family. After all, her identity is a bit. She looked at her brother and said carefully, "A bit inconvenient, so very few people know what she looks like. But occasionally, some news comes from the young lady of the Yi family. It said that the two of them are bosom buddies and very close." The young lady of the Yi family? Hearing the word Yi now, Fan Xian instinctively felt nervous. The daughter of Yi Zhong, the commander of the capital's garrison, Yi Ling. Fan Ro asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Fan Xian smiled, thinking of the first day he had entered the capital, when he had seen the girl on the horse. If he could find her, he wasn't afraid of losing any clues. But Fan Ro thought for a moment, then said, "But I'm guessing that the girl you met today is definitely not the young lady of the Lin family. So even if I ask Yi Ling, it won't be of any use." "Why are you so sure?" Fan Xian had always hoped that the plot of a romance novel would come true for him. Hearing this now, he couldn't help but be surprised. Chapter 61. Moonlight shone on the porch. Fan Ro said with pity, "My future sister-in-law is said to be suffering from tuberculosis. She often coughs up blood, so she has been forbidden to eat meat. The girl you speak of is eating chicken legs." She thought about the scene her brother had described earlier and couldn't help but laugh. Of course it can't be Miss Lin. Furthermore, it said that Miss Lin's appearance is only delicate and pretty. She's definitely not as beautiful as you described. Fan Xian thought about it and sighed. He put the matter aside, but he wouldn't give up on the idea of finding the girl. Another image appeared in his mind, and he couldn't help but frown. Tuberculosis. He knew that in this world, tuberculosis was equivalent to an incurable disease. Although he had studied with Fei Jia for a year and had never stopped cultivating in all aspects, since the other party was the daughter of the eldest princess, there would definitely be an imperial physician to treat it. If even the imperial physicians could not cure it, what could he do? Fei Jia's absence was a big problem. The next day, when Fan Xian woke up, he found that his father, sister, and Lady Lu were not there. He ate some porridge and side dishes, then prepared to leave. He planned to go to the Temple of Qing to try his luck and see if he could meet the girl again. Just as he was about to leave, Fan Xija ran over and pulled on his sleeve. He pulled him into the study and very seriously handed him a few pieces of paper. Fan Xian looked at him curiously and saw that his brother's eyes were bloodshot. It seemed that he had stayed up all night. "You didn't sleep?" he asked. "If Second Aunt saw you, wouldn't she scold you again?" Fan Xija laughed. "I learned from you. I kept it a secret." Fan Xian smiled and rubbed the pieces of paper with his fingers. He rested his chin on his hand and looked at them. Written on them were the plans that Fan Xija had made the night before. Although Fan Xian had not been a successful businessman in his previous life, he had seen pigs run. The business atmosphere of his previous life and the kingdom of Qing today could not be mentioned in the same breath. Add to that the special profession he had once held, and he was confident in this. His brows gradually furrowed. "That's a good idea, but I'm not familiar with the capital, so the location of the bookstore is up to you. But there's a problem. Although we're the only one who has the manuscript, how can you guarantee that other booksellers won't steal it after you've printed it?" Fan Xija said with a face full of fanaticism, "The family is very idle now, and those servants have nothing to do. We can let them wander the streets, and if they see a pirated shop, they can smash it." Fan Xian was dumbfounded. "Do you only know how to smash and rob?" It did not meet his expectations at all. He shook his head with a bitter smile. "Don't think that the booksellers are inconspicuous. In fact, the profits they make are not small. Who knows what kind of background they have? What are you afraid of? This manuscript originally belonged to our family. How can he be justified in stealing it? Fan Xizha shouted. Fan Xian reminded him. There are no provisions in the Qin Kingdom's laws that protect manuscript from being printed. Besides, this book didn't pass the 8th Bureau's inspection. If you go to court, I'm afraid you'll have to pay for it first. Fan Xizha chuckled and said, I'm not afraid of that. If we really want to open a bookstore, we can just have our father write a letter. The 8th Bureau won't refuse. Fan Xian thought about it and agreed. His seemingly ordinary father had a much deeper relationship with the Overwatch Council than most people knew. He changed his mind and said, but even if you get rid of your identity as a banned book, you can't just rely on smashing and robbing to destroy your competitors. As the saying goes, you can't hit someone in the face. You chased away middle-aged women on the streets and alleys of the capital and closed down other people's shops. That's a way of shedding all pretense of cordiality. For the sake of money, it's not worth it for both sides to fight each other. What are you afraid of? Fan Xizha rolled his eyes. It seemed that his older brother was a bit too soft-hearted. If you don't think it's worth it, you can think of a way to make a rule. In the future, we'll follow the rule. If other booksellers dare to steal it again, we'll just have the authorities deal with it. Fan Xian laughed heartily. Rules? Do you think the laws of the court will be so trifling? Just because the Fan family wants to publish a book, they'll change the law? Fan Xizha shook his head. How can we change the law? Of course, we have to take the lower path. Changing the rules of the Jingdo garrison is very simple. That fierce woman in Yizhong's family has a good relationship with Princess Rojia. We just have to ask my sister to let Prince Jing's manor and the Yi manor know. Fan Xian's interest was piqued. The capital's garrison regulations can regulate the sale of books? Fan Xizha was surprised. After thinking for a moment, he said, there seems to be a clause in there that governs refugees and traveling merchants. It'll be a good time to make use of it. Fan Xian was full of admiration. He thought that this young man in front of him had the potential to become an unscrupulous businessman. He could even think of such a ruthless move as collusion between the government and merchants and the city guards. But he knew that there was always a gap between ideals and reality. He asked, have you calculated the profits? 10 chapters per volume, 8 taels of silver per volume. There are 68 chapters in total. There are 640,000 people in the capital. 1 volume per 1,000 people means that we can sell more than 600 copies. If we calculate it carefully, we can sell them for 35,840 taels of silver. Fan Xizha explained with great interest. He had already calculated all of these costs. The rent on Luodong Road is more expensive. Plus the editing costs. We can leave the printing to the Hall of Scrolls. That way, we won't have to worry about it. The Hall of 10,000 Scrolls. Fan Xian asked curiously. The most famous private printing workshop in the capital. Fan Xizha laughed sinisterly. They have a big business, but they don't have any reliable people behind them. If they dare to steal our manuscripts, we could just copy them and turn them upside down. I'm afraid they'll make even more money. Fan Xian was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. If we calculate it carefully, we can make at least a few thousand taels of silver in a year. If we can really make other booksellers stop, the number will increase. Fan Xian sighed. You're too optimistic. If you want to be a successful businessman, you must first prepare for a rainy day. Let's talk about the number you estimated. Although the people of the capital are wealthy, each set costs more than 50 taels of silver. How many people can afford it? Fan Xizha was shocked. He looked at Fan Xian as if he were looking at a monster. Don't you know the market price of your book? Fan Xian's eyes widened. In his previous life, Dream of the Red Chamber had become popular during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor. He had heard rumors that it was sold for hundreds of taels of silver. But that was only a handwritten copy, and not many copies have been circulated. If you were going to publish it in a big way, could it be sold for so much? Fan Xizha sighed. A few days ago, I heard that the daughter of the capital's magistrate read your book. She couldn't eat or drink and was in a daze. The magistrate's wife burned the manuscript. She cried out in pain, "Why did you burn my precious treasure?" She fell ill for a long time. Brother, the capital is not like other places. There are as many officials as there are carps swimming around. How many young ladies are there who have nothing to do? Selling hundreds or thousands of copies is not a problem. Fan Xian was dumbfounded. He wondered if he should bring some snacks to the poor magistrate's daughter. Chapter 62. Then he heard Fan Cija say, proudly, "This is just a small amount of money. After I've earned this much, I'll write another 70 or 80 chapters. I can't sell them all. I'll have to edit them carefully and make a rare edition. Then I'll auction them all off in private. Whoever wants to see the end first, whoever wants to see whether or not Miss Duo is married to Second Master Bao, will have to pay up first." Fan Xian twisted his ear and scolded him. "What does Miss Duo have to do with Second Master Bao? You've never even read a book, and you want to sell it." Fan Cija felt wronged. "The one you bought on the street yesterday, I asked my sister to read it when I got home, but after reading a few dozen words, I felt it was boring, so I fell asleep." This young master of fan manner, who only cared about money, really didn't understand why the women in the capital were crazy about this tasteless book. "Fine, I won't argue with you about this," Fan Xian said helplessly. "But these things are complicated, and you're just a little kid who has to go to school. You don't have time for these things. Let's wait a few years." "A few years? The safflower will be cold by then," Fan Cija shrieked. "What else can we do? You're a son of Fan Manor. After all, if you really go into business, how can you hide it from Lady Lu and father? Be careful, or they'll tear your skin off." Fan Cija said painfully, "Yes, so I've decided to borrow a shopkeeper from Qingyu Hall, and I'll have to hide behind the scenes." Fan Xian was very surprised. Aside from being rude and unreasonable, this young man in front of him was also very talented in business. He had actually thought of becoming a professional manager. In his excitement, Fan Xian had inadvertently left out the words Qingyu Hall. Seeing that the boy had made up his mind, he sighed and took out the banknotes he had accumulated over the years, plus the money his sister had given him, and handed them over. He told him to take it slow and to first discuss things with the servants in the manor. It wasn't a good idea to feed those people without using them. Fan Cija beamed and counted the money. He found that this brother of his had a lot of money, and with the money he had saved up, he should have enough for his first startup capital. Fan Xian didn't say anything else. He only carefully reminded him, "If you want to use the connections of the upper class to suppress the good people of the lower class, other than relying on your father's name, you also have to promise other people some benefits." "What are you talking about, big brother?" Fan Cija said fiercely. "Of course we have to bribe them. If you become a high-ranking official in the future, there will be a day when they will spit it back out." Fan Xian almost fainted. He quickly pushed the door open and left. In the past, he had always felt that banknotes had a peculiar fragrance. Today, he realized that the stench of money really was overwhelming. It was noon, and the sun was blazing fiercely. The trees on both sides of the road drooped lifelessly, unable to provide any comfort or shelter to the pitiful pedestrians. Fan Xian picked up a bowl of sour plum soup by the side of the road and took small sips. He knew that drinking too quickly wouldn't quench his thirst, and his stomach wouldn't be able to take it. He listened to the sounds of cicadas in the trees next to him and was very puzzled. What month was it? Spring hadn't even passed yet, so why was summer already here? In the distance, the Temple of Qing looked particularly solemn under the sun. It had dried up some of its original elegance, and its black, round eaves reflected the sunlight. The scene was very sacred. Today, the Temple of Qing was more lively than yesterday. From time to time, people would go in to pray. Fan Xian was a little curious. Why had it been so quiet when he had gone yesterday? Of course, he didn't know that when the nobleman had stolen half a day's rest, both sides of the road had already been guarded. The reason he had been able to walk to the door and exchange blows with the master was all because of someone's secret indulgence. Wu Zhu had indeed indulged him, indulging him in drinking and fooling around. Even when he wanted to go to the temple, Wu Zhu would knock out so many guards for such a small matter. Fan Xian didn't know how much trouble he had gotten himself into yesterday. He was still sitting on the bench, drinking sour plum soup and waiting for the girl with his legs crossed. In a room very close to the Temple of Qing, the sunlight couldn't penetrate the room, so it was a little dark and cool. Gong Jian sat coldly on a chair, adjusting his internal energy so that he could enter into peak condition. Last night, he had been on duty, but this morning he hadn't returned home. Instead, he had come to the Temple of Qing, because no matter how he thought about it, he felt that there was something strange about the appearance of that young man yesterday. All of his subordinates had been knocked out by a grandmaster at the same time. What was the connection between that and that young man entering the Temple of Qing? For some reason, Gong Jian felt that the young man would definitely come here again today. Perhaps that mysterious master would also come here. This was the intuition of a master. Although it wasn't necessarily accurate, it was worth a gamble. But that damned eunuch Hong didn't believe his judgment at all. He just kept investigating among the guards. So Fan Xian had to come alone. Gong Jian sat quietly in the room. His gaze passed through the narrow crack in the window, coldly looking at the entrance of the Temple of Qing. Outside, Fan Xian finally couldn't stand the scorching sun anymore. He drank the soup in one gulp, undid the 2 buttons on his shirt, and walked toward the Temple of Qing with his tongue out. Fan Xian's footsteps drew closer and closer to the Temple of Qing. Gong Jian seemed to hear something and frowned slightly. Under the sky full of sunlight, Fan Xian's feet felt hot when they landed on the stone floor. He seemed to hate this feeling and pulled his feet back. Then, he fastened the buttons on his chest and turned around with a smile. He returned to the stall selling sour plum soup and asked for another bowl. He slowly drank it, then walked away from the Temple of Qing with leisurely steps. It wasn't until he got into the waiting carriage at the end of the street that he exhaled and shouted, "Return to the manor quickly." Tung Zijing looked at him curiously and found that the young master's face was expressionless. Sitting in the carriage, Fan Xian turned his head and lifted the rear curtain to look in the direction of the Temple of Qing. He frowned, not knowing why Wu Zhu had told him to leave, and even less knowing who was waiting for him there. Gong Dian's face was cold as he looked in front of him. When he heard the footsteps heading back, his eyes lit up and he prepared to stand up. Unexpectedly, he felt a gust of cold wind blowing from behind him and his neck felt cold. It was late spring and the weather was hot, but Gong Jian broke out in a cold sweat. His hands rested steadily on his knees. His fingernails were well manicured, and the simple but incomparably sharp knife rested 3 inches in front of his hands. But he didn't dare to draw it. He could feel that the person behind him was stronger and faster than him. Chapter 63. Gong Jian was recognized as one of the strongest fighters in the capital. He had experienced countless life and death situations in his life, but he had never imagined that he would meet such a powerful figure in the heavily guarded capital, next to the Temple of Qing. The aura of the person behind him was not very strong, but the feeling of being one with the environment was something that Gong Jian had only seen from his uncle. He and the commander of the capital's garrison were brothers, and his uncle was Yi Luyun, one of the 4 grandmasters in the world. From what he knew, he could not imagine that a grandmaster would disregard his identity and appear behind him like an assassin. The room was silent for a long time. The little finger on Gong Dian's left hand trembled slightly. He knew that he could no longer maintain this passive balance, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Without any warning, the real qi in his body rushed out, and his whole body turned into a gray dragon. His left foot kicked backwards, and his right hand hooked. Clang! A clear sound rang out, and the blade cut through the air. It turned into a fearless slash and chopped behind him. With a muffled grunt, the slash hit nothing but air. The mysterious grandmaster from before had long disappeared. Gong Dian's inner strength was vigorous, and after his slash missed, he was unable to restrain his spirit. His chest felt as if it had been struck by lightning, and a hot current rushed up his body. 2 streaks of blood seeped out of his nostrils. Looking at the empty ground, there was no fear in Gong Dian's eyes, only a trace of confusion. The opponent clearly had the ability to easily assassinate him, so why did he leave in the end? In an instant, he thought of the youth from the day before, which was very similar to his own. He guessed that the grandmaster who had just appeared and disappeared might have some connection to his own school, and that was why he had been merciful. After resting for a while, he walked out of the small room with a somewhat dispirited expression, ready to return to the manor. Why did Wu Zhu not kill him? It was obvious that it was not because of Yi Liuyun's incense. After all, Wu Zhu was a monster who even dared to kill Yi Liuyun. The reason was actually very simple. Yesterday, Gong Jian had made Fan Xian vomit blood, so today, Wu Zhu wanted to make Gong Jian vomit blood. It was that simple. It was still early when Fan Xizha returned to Fan Manor. Fan Xizha was still in his study, working on his money-making project. Ruo had been sent off to someone. In the entire garden, there were only a few servants and maids. Although some of the maids were very pretty, Fan Xian was not in a good mood, and the environment was not right, so he had no interest in teasing them. He drank a cup of tea and frowned. Who was it that was in the temple of Qing today? Why was the other party guarding him there? Could it be that it was a family member left behind by the lady in white, waiting for him? Thinking of this possibility, Fan Xian's heart warmed. But thinking of Wu Zhu's message, his heart immediately cooled. If it was as he guessed, Uncle Wu Zhu would certainly not care. He was a wooden person and was not very interested in the matters of love. Fan Xian changed into a lighter set of clothes, loosened his belt, and entered his father's study. To his surprise, he found Count Sinan there. There's not much to do in the ministry today. Fan Jing had his son sit down. You've been in the capital for a few days now. Don't be fooling around outside all day. I already know about what happened in the restaurant yesterday. In the future, you should avoid these kinds of conflicts as much as possible. Don't be like that good-for-nothing brother of yours. Fan Xian laughed bitterly. He didn't want to explain any further. Suddenly, he thought of something and asked, Father, when can I go see Miss Lin? Fan Jing seemed surprised that the young man would make such a suggestion. When you're married, he said with a smile, you'll see her every day. Are you in a rush? Fan Xian pursed his lips into a smile. After marriage is after marriage. I don't want to go to the bridal chamber without knowing what my wife looks like. He thought for a moment, then smiled. I see my sister, that Yi Linger and Princess Rojia are often out. Is there anything wrong with keeping a distance between a man and a woman? A young man and a young woman seeing each other isn't too much. Fan Jing smiled. But you must know that Miss Lin's identity is rather special. Although her surname is Lin, she has little to do with the Prime Minister's manor. She grew up in the palace. For the sake of the royal family, and for the sake of the eldest princess, His Majesty took her in as his adopted daughter. She was given the title of princess, but this princess is different from Rojia. Fan Jing's voice was a little suppressed. Although few people know that she is the daughter of the eldest princess, and that she is the daughter of Master Lin. No one dares to say it, and no one dares to admit it. She lives in the palace for many years, and very few people see her. It was only at the beginning of the year that she moved out because of that incident, and because of her poor health. Fan Xian sighed. I heard that she was in poor health, so I wanted to see her. Perhaps I could be of some help. Fan Jing frowned. You and Fei Jie have only been together for a year and a half. Do you dare to say that you are better than the imperial physicians? Young people should be modest and cautious. Fan Xian agreed, but he still didn't give up. But you have to at least let me know what she looks like, right? You married her not for her, but for what she stands for. Fan Jing looked at him coldly. You must abandon all unrealistic ideas and be as hard as a rock to crush any stale feelings of warmth. Fan Xian furrowed his brows with some disgust and said, I feel that your words are also very corny. Fan Jing was slightly angry. How can you say that? Fan Xian smiled and replied respectfully, I've said it before. I'm not a person who is easy to control. Don't you want to take back everything that belongs to you? Fan Jing seemed to have thought of something and calmed down. Fan Xian was surprised and then very seriously said, Actually, when I was in Danzhou, I learned many things. I believe that I have the ability to achieve things in this world that correspond to my abilities. If I can take back my mother's business, of course I won't object, but this must be based on my own will. If I want to, I will do it. If I don't want to, I won't. It's that simple. Chapter 64. Fan Jian sighed. He knew that the young man in front of him was just like his mother. Neither could be persuaded. His eyes softened, and he said softly, "This marriage between the two families is not the true driving force behind it, nor is it the Prime Minister's manner. Because there are many things involved, the matter is a bit complicated. Since you want to see the girl, then find a way to do it yourself." "I can't do it myself." Fan Xian bowed. "As long as father agrees, I will find a way to see her." He thought of what he had heard earlier and felt a little puzzled. What if the Prime Minister refuses to agree to the marriage? Count Sinan laughed coldly. "As I said, there is a great power behind this, and he has no choice but to agree. Don't forget, the young lady of the Lin family has not returned to the Lin family. She is still His Majesty's adopted daughter, a princess of the palace." In April and May weather, Fan Xian felt as if someone had poured a bucket of ice water over him from head to toe. It was cold. It was only now that he realized that his marriage was not as simple as it seemed because it involved the emperor's decision on who would be in charge of the large estate. The real decision-maker behind the scenes was actually some powerful figure hidden in the depths of the palace. But he didn't know if it was the Empress Dowager or the Emperor. "Why does the Prime Minister oppose it?" he asked, frowning. Count Sinan took a sip of tea and frowned. It seemed that the tea was a little bitter. He stuck the tip of his tongue between his teeth and said indistinctly, "Didn't I say it last time?" Fan Xian smiled and pointed out his father's faulty wording. "Last time, you said that the Prime Minister was afraid that His Majesty would suspect that there was something hidden behind his marriage with the Fan family. But in fact, since the marriage was approved by the palace, what does he have to fear?" Fan Jian was speechless for a moment. It took him a while to recover. He smiled and put his teacup on the table. "Fine, I'll tell you the truth. It's the eldest princess who doesn't want her daughter to marry you." Fan Xian was startled. What was this? After all this fuss, the other party's parents didn't want to marry her. What was he doing? It would be better for him to wash his hands clean and go beg the noble family's young lady in white. That was what he thought, but he knew he could not say it out loud. His father was still able to persuade some important person in the palace to force the marriage, even though the eldest princess and the Prime Minister were against it. One could imagine how much hidden power the Fan family had used in the process. "Why isn't the eldest princess willing?" he asked curiously, thinking to himself, that Miss Lin's background is not much different from mine. Confucius and a little stud were both illegitimate children. What's the point of putting on airs? This is an anomaly. His Majesty loves that princess very much, even more than the princess. Once, when I was drunk, I unintentionally mentioned that if the princess were to get married, the eldest princess should hand over her power to the princess's future husband, lest the royal bloodline would suffer in the future. Count Sinan gently stroked his 4-inch beard, seemingly in a good mood. Fan Xian spread his hands and sighed. "So that's how it is. It seems that the eldest princess is also someone who loves power. Back then, I don't know why she didn't marry the Prime Minister and raise children and grandchildren. Wouldn't that have been much happier?" Count Sinan laughed coldly. "In the end, it's love that hurts. If the princess had married Lin Ruofu, he would have been noble, but he would not have been able to display his knowledge. How could he have become the head of all the officials like he is now, with his limitless glory?" Fan Xian frowned. Only now did he remember that the emperor's son-in-law could not enter the court as an official. He only had a title and name. If you were to marry that Miss Lin, even though she is only a princess in the palace and not in the imperial register, I'm afraid there would be some problems with your career. Count Sinan saw him frown and thought that this was what he was worried about, so he simply said it out loud. Fan Xian stood up and smiled. "We'll talk about it later." "That's true. After the imperial examinations next year, you'll have to start studying." Fan Xian wondered if he really would have to participate in the imperial examinations and compete with those fan genes. He smiled wryly and did not reply. Then Count Sinan told him that the next day, Prince Jing's monthly poetry conference would be held again, and that Fan Xian should prepare. When Fan Xian heard this, it was not as frightening as telling him to write 8 essays. But when he thought of the possibility of being forced to fabricate a few salt smugglers, Old Exen, Old Su, Old Li, and Old Du, Fan Xian felt a headache coming on. Fan Xian looked at him and smiled. I know you have a talent for poetry. In some situations, you don't need to hide your talent too much. Even though there are people in the palace who will help with this marriage, if you can gain some reputation in the capital's literary circles, the eldest princess might be more willing to marry off her daughter. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. He knew that the old man in front of him had secretly read the letters he had written to his sister. Naturally, he could not hide the fact that he had written Dream of the Red Chamber from him. But seeing that his father had endured until now, he couldn't help but admire his shrewd and ruthless character. There were no Sundays in this era. Even if you worked, there was no god who would take a knife to chop you. Similarly, there were no Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, or even Fridays in this era. In short, there was no clear distinction between working days and rest days. Shops were open every day, and government affairs were handled every day. It was said that even the emperor could not stop for a single day to pass through memorials. But for the children of the wealthy families that could be found everywhere in the capital, the only thing they could do every day was play. After the war 16 years ago, the Northern Wei kingdom was divided and weak. The Western barbarians fled far away, leaving only 1,000 wild horses grazing in the Yin Mountains. With one command from the emperor, the great prince led 100,000 soldiers to the western frontier. This was also a form of play. In the kingdom of Qing, martial arts flourished. But after the emperor grew tired of fighting, he suddenly became fond of poetry. Whatever the emperor liked, the emperor followed suit. Most of the children of the other wealthy families did not have anything to do, nor did they have the right to lead troops for play. Fortunately, they all had to prepare for the imperial examinations, so they could play with elegance. They played to a different level from the common people. They had to read books, understand books, read poems, and write poems. So now, the most popular thing in the capital was not the duels between martial arts masters, but the so-called poetry conferences. Chapter 65. Both the Crown Prince's and the Crown Prince's poetry gatherings were the busiest social occasions in the capital. They were held once a month, rain or shine. Who knew how many scholars from poor families and poets from poor families tried their best to get involved, hoping to make a name for themselves with a poem or phrase and find a way to rise in status. The Crown Prince was fond of literature, and this was something everyone knew. Although Crown Prince Jing was the emperor's younger brother, he had always aspired to be a wealthy and idle prince, so he did not have much power. Comparing the two, those with clear goals were naturally more willing to go to the Crown Prince's side. But if they could get a compliment from Crown Prince Jing, it was also a good way to make a name for themselves. So every time the poetry gatherings were held, the Crown Prince's manor, not far from Shishing Gate, would always welcome many guests. Some of these guests came in palanquins, some in carriages, and some on foot. But the old housekeeper at the gate treated them all the same. After checking their name cards, he respectfully invited them in. Fan Xian sat in the palanquin, his face very ugly, alternating between green and white. From time to time, he covered his mouth to suppress the urge to vomit. Because he had come to attend the poetry gatherings, which was a scholarly event, sitting in a palanquin with green curtains would have been more appropriate. He had requested to sit in a palanquin with his sister. But having lived by the Danzhou coast for so long, he did not feel dizzy from the swaying of the boat, but the palanquin did. As he struggled, he pulled open the side curtain of the palanquin and asked Teng Zijing weakly, "How far is it?" Teng Zijing held back his laughter and replied, "Just past the intersection." Fan Xian grunted and sat back down. His fingers opened like orchids, and he put his thumb and ring finger together, allowing the jinqi to slowly flow out and cleanse his internal organs. The nausea was somewhat gone, but could not cure the palanquin dizziness. At that moment, there were many questions lingering in his mind, and his body was not feeling well, so he furrowed his brows. These days living in the manor, he felt that his father was very different from what he had imagined, and there were many things that he could not explain. For example, why did he care so much about his illegitimate son? Was it really because of his mother that he loved him as well? He turned his head to look out of the sedan chair. Through the thin green cloth, he saw the figure sitting on the horse. He knew that although Tang Zijing was currently leaning towards him, he was still his father's man, and he could not completely trust him. He sighed and thought to himself that he had to find some trustworthy subordinates. Uncle Wu Zhu was like a ghost and was not someone he could casually order around. Fan Xian really wanted to know what his mother had done in Jingdou, how she had met his father, and how she had left this world. This wasn't just out of pure curiosity and admiration. He believed that only by knowing his history would he be able to better grasp his present and future. In the royal prince's estate, a few scholars were bowing to a young man in front of a garden gate. They had never expected that Crown Prince Jing's heir would personally welcome them at the gate for today's poetry meet. Two small green curtain sedans slowly swayed over. Crown Prince Jing somewhat impatiently cupped his hands at those fellows who were bowing to him, and then went forward to greet them. Only now did the scholars realize that they had misunderstood, but they did not dare to show any expression on their faces. They continued to smile proudly and elegantly cup their hands in salute. Led by the housekeeper, they went to the back garden. The servants at the gate of the manor were curious as well. What kind of distinguished guest could make the crown prince personally come out to welcome them? When they saw the girl in the yellow dress step down from the first sedan chair, they realized that it was the young lady of Fan Manor. Not to mention the relationship between King Jing's manor and Fan Manor. Considering the personal relationship between Princess Rojia and Miss Fan, it was inconvenient for a girl to show her face in public, so it was only right for her to be welcomed outside the garden. Sister Ruo. Crown Prince Jing's surname was Li, and his name was Hongsheng. In the capital, he had always been inseparable from places like brothels. But in front of Miss Fan, the crown prince kept his head down and appeared very polite. Fan Ruo bowed slightly and greeted the crown prince. She then smiled and said, "What topic did Rojia set today?" The crown prince smiled and replied, but his eyes occasionally glanced at the sedan chair behind him. It had been half a day, so why hadn't that man come down yet? A servant had already come forward and very respectfully lifted the curtain of the sedan chair. Unexpectedly, the sedan chair was empty. For a moment, everyone in the manor was shocked. What was going on? Fan Ruo covered her mouth and laughed. She explained, "Brother is in the back." As they spoke, they saw a young man of 16 or 17 rushing over from not far away, panting. He was followed by an attendant. This young man was wearing a light maroon unlined shirt, and his collar buttons were not fastened properly, which inevitably made him look a little frivolous. However, when paired with his cute, friendly, and clean face, others would feel that this person should be dressed in such a relaxed manner. Sorry. Fan Xian cupped his hands and bowed to the crown prince. He said awkwardly, "I was dizzy in the sedan chair, so I walked all the way here. The weather was a bit hot, so I drank a bowl of sour berries outside the manor before coming here. I'm late. You're not late. As soon as Li Hongsheng saw the young man he had met once before, he was overjoyed. He laughed and said, "It is good that Brother Fan is here." Fan Xian heard the way he addressed him and noticed that there was an extra fan in it. For a moment, he didn't know what attitude the crown prince was trying to express. He paused, and a smile appeared on his face. "The sour berries outside the manor are better than anywhere else, so of course I came to see." The crown prince, Li Hongsheng, smiled slightly. Seeing the conversation drift off into the distance, he found it even more interesting. He led the way, and the two of them entered the garden. When Fan Xian was in Danzhou, he knew that his sister was a good poet, although in his opinion, these poems were often just sentimental and couldn't escape certain conventions. There were still good poems in this era, but it was clear that the young scholars who often attended the poetry gatherings didn't have much attainment. So Fan Ruo still had a small reputation as a poet. So he was very curious about how his sister would behave on such an occasion, and what Princess Ruoja, who had caused the outflow of Dream of the Red Chamber and sold it to the bootleg bookseller, would look like. But as he followed Li Hongsheng into the back garden, with its winding corridors and flowing water, he realized that in this seemingly open country, men and women still sat separately. The women sat in a pavilion across the lake, with layers of white muslin hanging in front of them, dancing in the wind. Fan Xian followed the crown prince to the other side of the lake, a little disappointed. Looking at the muslin in the distance, he couldn't help but think of Zhou Xingxing, whom he had loved the most in his previous life. He sighed to himself, it really feels like first love. Chapter 66. In the back garden of Prince Jing's manor. Remembering that the two families were familiar with each other, the crown prince asked Fan Xian to make himself at home and went to greet the other guests. After all, there were a few eye-catching people here today. Fan Xian did not know of the undercurrents beneath the calm surface. He walked casually, and among the seemingly scattered seats, he found an isolated spot that suited his temperament and sat down. Seeing that there was wine on the table, he very consciously poured a cup and took a sip. Fan Xian sighed in his heart and looked up at the sky. It was fortunate that the sun was not too hot today. Otherwise, he would not be able to see any beautiful women at this poetry gathering, and he would have to listen to sour poems. With the sun roasting him, he would become a vinegar-dried chicken. The scholars seemed to be sitting casually, but in reality they were all surrounding a small table in the middle of the grass, so not many people noticed him. A few noblemen near him saw that he was unfamiliar, but he had been personally brought in by the crown prince. They curiously stepped forward to greet him, ready to ask about his background. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian smiled wholeheartedly and spoke seamlessly. After a long time, they still did not know which family this beautiful young man was from. After chatting for a while, they could not help but feel a little bored, so they all retreated and quietly waited for the poetry gathering to begin. It was said that this day was different from the previous few days. The sun was gentle, the willows were fluttering, and the spring breeze was strong enough to drill into people's collars. Of course, the wind at the end of spring did not have any cold power. It was like an invisible little hand, gently moving, very comfortable. It was the perfect time to sleep. Fan Xian was not a dissolute madman, so at first he put on a smile and forced his eyes open, listening to the poetry and watching the wine being poured. But with the spring breeze and the little sun, he felt that the poetry gathering was really boring, so he gradually felt dizzy and wanted to sleep. He could only vaguely hear a few sentences, such as, "In the dream of Lijo Road, here we go again." If not for the mountain man asking for a high price, he would laugh at himself. "And the wine cup is thick, a gourd drunk Lu Wang," a gourd of wine pressing down on the tip of a flower. "And the Dongi people are all wandering, thanks to this man's maturity." Fan Xian pinched the web between his thumb and index finger to wake himself up. Although he did not like reciting poetry, in this kind of situation, he could not reveal the personality of his past life that had not been washed away after 16 years. So he smiled, but looked at the scene somewhat woodenly. As he looked, he saw a few people he was not familiar with. These people were sitting in the most comfortable seats by the lake. They were Guobaoquan, his own way, and the others who had a conflict at the restaurant the day before yesterday. Fan Xian frowned slightly. Crown Prince Jing clearly knew about the dispute between Fan Manor and the Guo family that day. So why did he call both sides over today? As if sensing his gaze, Guobaoquan, who had been showing off his mature and steady demeanor to the beauties across the lake, turned his head. When he saw that it was the Fan family's black boxer, his expression changed. He could no longer maintain his scholarly demeanor, and subconsciously threw the fan in his hand onto the table. There was an Imperial College student explaining the meaning of the scriptures, so not many people noticed Guobaoquan's son's reaction. The people at Guobaoquan's table followed his gaze, and immediately found Fan Xian hiding in a remote corner. Their expressions changed, thinking that they were all scholars, and they had not brought any guards with them today. If that Fan Manor boy used another black boxer, who would stand up to him? Fan Xian looked at them with a smile and nodded, greeting them as if they were friends. The people at the table discussed something in low voices, and a slightly gloomy smile gradually appeared on their faces. Guobaoquan's face, which had always been gloomy, had an additional hint of joy. Only his own way seemed to have a disapproving expression. It was unknown what the girls on the other side of the lake were doing under the white silk, but the court lady had long since copied the poems that the girls had composed and sent them here for the scholars to evaluate. The crown prince laughed heartily. Although women are not inferior to men, literature is not a battle of brute force. Do not be courteous. You cannot lose to those weak women. Everyone agreed in unison, and laughter gradually arose. Someone suggested using something as a topic to compose a poem, and then choosing the 3 best ones to match with the one on the other side of the lake. A scholar at Gwobałkawen's table rolled his eyes and cupped his hands in salute. I am not talented. How about using the lake as a topic? Excellent. Today's blue waves are floating gold. Someone else suggested. Absolutely. Look at the lake and the mountains. Someone else suggested. Gwobałkawen rolled his eyes and looked at Fan Xian. I did not expect young Master Fan to come today, he said in a loud voice. Why don't we start with young Master Fan? Fan Xian had come today on his father's orders, to show off in front of the people of the capital. Hearing that he was being asked to compose a poem, he smiled and shook his head. I do not have that ability. Everyone, please. Seeing him concede, Gwobałkawen increasingly felt that he really was an embroidered pillow. He laughed coldly. A few days ago, Brother Fan was talking big in Esher Tavern, looking down on all the scholars of the world. Today, I see that you are stingy with your advice. It seems that your standards are indeed very high. Hearing him say this, everyone present realized that there had long been animosity between the 2 sides, and that he was using poetry to pick a fight. Most of the people in the manor were guests of King Jing's manor. Although they did not know who Fan Xian was, they saw that he seemed to be familiar with the crown prince. So, some people guessed that he might be a descendant of the Fan clan. Few people guessed that he was the son of Count Sinan, Fan Jian. Seeing the people around him talking, Gwobałkawen took a sip of tea and laughed darkly. Brother Fan is the one who recently entered the capital. Everyone should have heard of him. None of the people present were idiots. They immediately knew who Fan Xian was, and when they looked at him again, their gazes were filled with pity, disdain, and many other complicated emotions. Fan Xian's expression did not change. He still wore a faint smile, but he insisted on not composing a poem. Crown Prince Jing looked at the smile on Fan Xian's face and found it increasingly difficult to see through him. A strange look flashed in his eyes, and he tried to smooth things over. Poetry is poetry. Brother Fan has no intention of doing so today. Everyone, please recite. Fan Xian leaned lazily on the table, watching everyone go back and forth, listening to each other's lackluster sentences. He felt very bored. In the eyes of the bystanders, this appearance was somewhat presumptuous. Inevitably, someone mocked. Miss Fan is famous in the capital for her poetry. Who would have thought that the young master of the Fan family would speak in silence? How unexpected. Gwobałkawen lowered his voice and laughed. After all, he was not raised in the manor. Of course, he has to be different. Although he lowered his voice, he deliberately made sure that everyone around him could hear. Although the kingdom of Qing was liberal, the status of an illegitimate child was not something that could be revealed in public. And Fan Xian's status was even more sensitive. Hearing him deliberately say this, for a moment, a strange atmosphere filled the air. Chapter 67. Behind the lake, under a white blanket, was a pavilion. 5 or 6 girls were sitting inside. Some were eating fruit and looking across the lake, covering their mouths as they laughed. Others were frowning, holding brushes in their hands as they pondered something. Judging by their clothing, they were either rich or noble. They were probably the daughters of officials in the capital. One of them wore a light yellow, tight-fitting jacket. Her eyes were unusually bright, like the translucent jade of the Western Sea. It was Yi Ling, the only daughter of the capital garrison, whom Fan Xian had caught a glimpse of from afar outside the capital. Yi Ling's gaze swept across the lake. She turned her head to look at Fan Ruo. Ruo, is that shameful child of yours here today? Hearing this, Fan Ruo felt an inexplicable anger rise in her heart. She slammed the brush in her hand onto the table. Yi Ling, she said lightly, Your mouth is like those knives and spears in your house. It's one thing to have a few sharp edges, but what kind of saw shop did you come from today? Hearing this, the girls in the pavilion all fell silent. No one had expected that the beautiful and gentle young lady of the Fan family would speak in such a manner. For some reason, Yi Ling hated the illegitimate son of the Fan family. That was why she had spoken so rudely earlier. Seeing the gentle young lady of the Fan family speak so harshly to her, she snorted. Anger rose in her heart, but she couldn't find the words to retort. Princess Rojia was grinding ink by Fan Ruo's side. Hearing the conversation between the two girls, she giggled and said innocently, "You two are usually very good friends. Why do you look like you've eaten sulfur today?" Princess Rojia was the youngest of the girls, and her status was the highest. Her temperament was also the most gentle, so when she spoke, the two girls in the atmosphere were unable to make a move. Yi Ling snorted. Who knows what young lady Fan is like today? Fan Ruo smiled slightly, suppressing her anger. Her long eyelashes fluttered. Although she was the daughter of an official, and Fan Ruo had always been known as a talented woman, she was still a young girl of 16. Who could hold back? She replied gently. My words concern my elder brother. I dare not be rude. Yi Ling laughed coldly. How am I rude? Could it be that the person who came with you today has already acknowledged his ancestry and entered the Fan clan's genealogy? Fan Ruo was exceptionally intelligent. She knew why Yi Ling was venting her anger on her brother. She smiled coldly and didn't answer. She walked out of the pavilion, and for some reason, Yi Ling followed. Princess Rojia sighed quietly, but didn't know what to do. The women in the pavilion also didn't know who Yi Ling was talking about. They also didn't know why the two of them were suddenly angry. They couldn't help but be confused. Outside the pavilion, the servant girls did not follow them. Fan Ruo was much more direct with her words. Her face darkened as she said, You are friends with Miss Lin. That is your business. She is not willing to marry my brother. That is her business. But if you speak rudely to my brother again, don't blame me for not caring about our past friendship. Yi Ling wrinkled her nose beautifully and complained. Yesterday, when you came to my manor, I told you that Chun'er doesn't want to marry your brother. I wanted you to go home and talk to him. Who would have thought that you would bring him to the prince's manor today? Don't think I don't know what your family is thinking. I'm afraid you want to use this opportunity to make a name for yourself at the poetry meet. So that... She stopped talking and waved her sleeve angrily. Seeing her expression, Fan Ruo sighed inwardly. She realized that these young ladies saw things just as her brother had said. They were extremely simple. Who do you want to talk to? Father or brother? You know that for people like us, marriage is not something we could decide for ourselves. Yi Ling bit her lip and spoke with a glimmer of hope. Why don't you let your brother leave the capital? Fan Ruo frowned and looked at her. She realized that what Yi Ling was saying was absurd and laughable. She had no idea that she might have been influenced by Fan Xian, which made her appear much more mature. But Yi Ling was still the same noble girl who did not know the sufferings of the world. Don't talk nonsense like that. Yi Ling looked at her and laughed coldly. Who is your brother? And who is my sister Lin? Fan Ruo smiled. My brother has no parents, and your sister Lin has no parents. Who are they? And what are they? Although the young lady of the Lin family was the Prime Minister's illegitimate daughter, the Prime Minister did not dare to acknowledge her. He could not acknowledge her. As for her mother, it was a secret the kingdom of Qing dare not speak of, so it was not wrong to say that she had no parents. Yi Ling seemed to have never imagined that Fan Ruo would say something so sharp. Her lips trembled with anger. Lowering her voice, she said fiercely, Do you think this marriage is settled? Who knows what will happen in the future? Fan Ruo's heart trembled slightly, but her face was still full of a gentle smile. She took a slow step forward, closing the distance between her and Yi Ling. She replied in an oppressive tone, Perhaps you don't know my brother very well, but I advise you not to do anything inappropriate. As for this marriage, I don't think it's settled. Perhaps after my brother sees the young lady of the Lin family that you care so much for, he'll immediately flee the capital. Although Yilinger was a martial artist who had been passed down in her family, in front of this delicate woman, her imposing manner gradually diminished. "Your brother dares to be so picky about Chena?" Fan Ruoruo sighed. Her expression was very much like Fan Xian's at times. "I just don't understand. This is a matter between Fan Manor and her family. Why are you so anxious?" Yilinger thought for a moment, then lowered her posture. "You know that Sister Lin's health is not very good. Since that's the case, why go against her wishes and marry someone she doesn't want to marry?" These words pierced Fan Ruoruo's heart. What young girl did not want to fall in love? What young girl did not want to marry the person she wanted to marry? Putting herself in Fan Ruo's shoes, Fan Ruo knew that Miss Lin, who was powerless to control her own love, was indeed rather pitiful. But this matter should be decided by the adults first, and then by my brother's opinion. There's nothing I can do, Miss Yi. She smiled in response to this last sentence. At that moment, Princess Rojia, worried about the conflict between them, came out of the pavilion to look for them. Seeing that they seemed to be fine, she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. "Let's go back," she said sweetly. Fan Ruo's eyes suddenly became calm. "Miss Yi," she said softly, "I hear that your friend is in poor health. It just so happens that my father knows a famous doctor. Would it be convenient for you to visit her at her manor?" Chapter 68. Yilinger was the only daughter of Yi Zhong, the commander of the capital garrison. Unfortunately, her family was all about martial arts, so she did not have a gentle and refined personality. With Yi Luyan, one of the 4 great-grandmasters, as her granduncle, the Yi family had a special position in the kingdom of Qing. But this young girl was not a tyrannical or unreasonable person. She just felt sorry for the Lin sisters, who spent every day on their sick beds and were forced to marry a man she had never met. So she was a bit worried. A few days ago, there was a rumor circulating among the nobles of the capital that the palace was preparing to marry Miss Lin to the illegitimate son of Fan Manor in Danzhou. When the news came out, Miss Lin was both ashamed and angry. She caught a cold that night and coughed up blood. Her illness worsened. Yilinger had been with her brother in Dingzhou, but when she heard the news, she rushed back to the capital. It was the scene Fan Xian had seen outside the city gates. A few days later, there was a rumor in the capital that the illegitimate son of Fan Manor had returned to the capital. Just like the young master of Fan Manor, Fan Xija, he was a hedonistic hedonist. This news made Yiling even angrier. She had gone to see Miss Lin the day before and found that she was slightly embarrassed. After questioning her, she guessed that Miss Lin had someone in mind, even though she did not get anything out of her. She couldn't bear to see her sisters sad, so she asked her father to plead with the palace to break off the marriage. Who would have guessed that her father would be so angry? She had no choice but to invite Fan Ruo to the manor to see if there was a way to delay the marriage. She knew it wasn't possible, but she had to try. Only then would she be able to fulfill her sisterly bond. Yilinger looked at Rojia, the gentle girl, and then at Fan Ruo. Her eyes were calm. Only now did she realize that Miss Ruo, who had always been known for her tranquility, was actually a formidable person. Hearing that she wanted to introduce a famous doctor, she said lightly, "There is no need." Fan Ruo did not stop there. She smiled. "If you really care about the young lady, what is there to fear about having that famous doctor take a look? Even the imperial doctors have no good ideas. That famous doctor you speak of." Yilinger forced herself not to show her disdain in front of the princess. Fan Ruo explained politely, "That doctor is Sir Fei's student." Yilinger's eyes lit up. She stepped forward and took Fan Ruo's hand. "Then I'll have to trouble you, sister." After chatting, the 3 of them returned to the pavilion. The rest of the girls saw that the 2 young ladies looked calm and thought that the matter had been resolved. Only then did they breathe a sigh of relief. There were maids and old women attending to them, and there was also a female official who had already copied the poems and sent them across the lake. After a short while, the poems of the gifted scholars on the other side of the lake were also copied over. The girls flipped through them and occasionally sighed in admiration. Fan Ruo propped her chin on her hand and looked across the lake. No one knew what she was thinking. Yilinger thought of that person and curiously took the scroll. She flipped through it, but did not see any signature by the surname Fan. "Where is Master Fan's poem?" she asked in surprise. She thought that since the Fan Manor had the man come to the manor to make a name for himself, then there was no reason for them to hide it. Master Fan did not compose a poem. So what? Princess Rojia looked at Fan Ruo, who was standing by the railing. A trace of bewilderment appeared on the girl's innocent face, and she asked what had happened. It was only now that the girls in the pavilion realized that the battle of tongues on the other side of the lake was no less intense. Princess Rojia smiled sweetly. "Sister Ruo, why don't you come and see the poems of the gifted scholars?" As the girls discussed, Fan Ruo had heard everything. She knew that her brother had been humiliated on the other side of the lake. She turned her head from the railing, a trace of anger hidden in her calm eyes. "These people can write poems?" she said coldly. Although the girls had always known that Miss Fan was proficient in the art of poetry, they were still surprised to hear her say such things. Fan Ruo turned around and picked up a thin brush by the side of the inkstone. She waved it over the paper and wrote a few lines. After it was dry, she handed it to the female official. "Send these 2 poems over," she ordered. The female official accepted her order and left. 2 flowers bloom, one on each side. On the other side of the lake, Guobaoquan had secretly revealed Fan Xian's identity. Everyone was silent, and the atmosphere was a little strange. A trace of anger flashed in Crown Prince Jing's eyes. He felt that the Crown Prince's subordinates had no sense of propriety. He clenched his fists and wondered whether or not he should teach them a lesson. But looking at Fan Xian, he felt that Fan Xian must have a way to deal with it, and that he didn't need to do anything. Count Sinan had asked Fan Xian to attend the poetry meet for a simple reason. He wanted him to make a name for himself and seize the first prize for entering the capital in order to move the heart of the eldest princess. But Fan Xian didn't seem anxious at all. It was hard to tell what he was thinking. Not long after the poems were delivered to the pavilion by the lake, a female librarian replied and handed the poem written by Miss Fan to the Crown Prince. Crown Prince Jing glanced at it, and his eyes lit up. "Good," he blurted. Beside him, the advisor moved closer and read it carefully. He nodded his head repeatedly. "It is indeed not bad, but..." He felt that this poem was written by a woman, and there was something wrong with it. But he remembered the relationship between the Fan family and the Junwang family, so he stopped talking. Everyone was curious and gathered around to see the words written on the paper in small, elegant characters. "The lake in August is level, and the emptiness is blurry. The steam of dreamy cloud lake shakes the city of Danzhou. If one wants to help without a boat, it is a shame to be wise. Sitting and watching the fishermen envy the fish." Good poem. No wonder it was written by Miss Fan. His own way was among them, and his voice of praise was particularly loud, as if it could reach the other side of the lake. She writes about the lake with ease and talks about nature. It is truly a good piece. Guobaoquan frowned. "There's only a small lake in front of us, and it doesn't seem appropriate to use steam. Besides, Dreamy Cloud Lake is in the south, and Danzhou is by the sea. Miss Fan only wrote beautiful words, but the word nature is lacking." Crown Prince Jing, on the other hand, saw something else in the poem. There was a saying in the poem, "If you wish to help, there is no boat or oar." It is shameful to be a sage. Sitting and watching the angler, there is only envy for the fish. Although it was vague, it still revealed the author's unwillingness to be a hermit and his desire to achieve something. It was a common practice in poetry. He turned his head to look at Fan Xian, who had been sitting quietly in a remote corner. But the poem was good, so everyone praised it, and not many agreed with Guobaoquan. As the Crown Prince was thinking, someone had already transferred their opinion to the other side of the lake, and Miss Fan's explanation had arrived. "The lake is water, and so is the sea. From Dreamy Cloud Lake to the East Sea, my brother's body sits in Danzhou, and his heart is in the sea. Why not use it as you please? This poem was written by my brother when he was 10 years old. Today, I have copied it, just to invite everyone to read it." The first part of the sentence was ignored, but it made it clear that this poem was not written by Miss Fan, but by Fan Xian, who had been silent all this time. At this moment, the scholars in the garden looked at Fan Xian, no longer with disdain and complexity, but with shock and confusion. To be able to write such a poem at the age of 10 was Fan Xian a genius. Chapter 69. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Countless gazes fell upon Fan Xian. He smiled shyly and cupped his hands in salute. He did not put on a flowery headscarf and pretend to be an artist. After all, he was Fan Xian, not Fan Wei. Seeing him like this, the crown prince almost laughed. He did not believe what Miss Fan had said. A 10-year-old might be able to write a good poem, but such a careful and measured tribute poem was unlikely. He guessed that Fan Xian had written it the night before and had Ruo bring it out on purpose, so that he could shock the world at the poetry conference. He did not dislike this. On the contrary, he found it interesting that someone as carefree as Fan Xian could write such a poem. Fan Xian did not know what the crown prince was thinking. He only knew that this poem, written by Meng Haoran in his previous life to flatter Zhang Juling, was of a higher standard than the people present, so he was satisfied. At least he had fulfilled his father's request. Guobaoquan looked at the gazes of the crowd and was furious. He had never imagined that this embroidered pillow would have such a life-saving poem. He was not willing to let it go. He laughed coldly. "Brother Fan, what other good poems do you have? After all, this is your masterpiece when you were 10. It was clear from his words that he did not believe that the poem was written by himself. Fan Xian sighed in his heart. Why did people always like to force him to do such things? When it came to composing poems, who in this world could be his match? After all, he was possessed by the three gods of Li, Du, and Su, and had 5,000 years of poetic experience. He smiled. I never write essays with a topic. Guobaoquan looked at his fearless appearance and gritted his teeth. Then please, Brother Fan, write as you please. Let the scholars of the capital see. Fan Xian frowned and looked coldly at the annoying fellow. He threw down a poem, got up, and left the garden. Led by the servants of the manor, he went to the latrine. As soon as the poem was spoken, the whole garden was shocked. It was like falling flowers and flowing water, sweeping away an army of 1,000. After a round of applause, the crowd was still savoring the taste. Guobaoquan's face was green and white, and he did not know what to say. At this moment, the crown prince no longer cared about how to hold the fan in his hand so that he would not fall for Fan Xian's criticism of his strength of character. With a snap, he closed the fan and recited, "The wind is strong, the apes howl mournfully, the white birds fly back on the clear sand. Boundless trees rustled down, and an endless river surged forth. 10,000 miles of sorrowful autumn is often a guest, 100 years of illness alone on the stage. Hardship and bitterness hate the thick frost on the temples, dejected and destitute the wine cup. Sorrowful, clear, boundless, endless, 10,000 miles, autumn, guests, 100 years, illness, loneliness, the sorrow of eternity, all in a cup of muddy wine. Good poem, good poem," the crown prince exclaimed in admiration. Suddenly, he thought of his father, who looked carefree on the outside, but was actually depressed on the inside. He did not know why, but his heart ached. He shook his head and remained silent for a long time. It was only after a long time that he came to his senses. Fan Xian was young. Although his life was wretched, how could he say that his hair was sickly? This was really inexplicable. It didn't make any sense at all. But everyone was still immersed in the atmosphere of the poem. Looking at the setting sun, whether it was the rich or the poor, they all felt that life was impermanent and that sorrow was always present. So the crowd inadvertently forgot that Fan Xian's life experience did not match the heaviness of the poem. No one suspected that it was written by someone else. After all, this poem could not have been written by anyone other than a great master of poetry. If it was a great master, he would not even be willing to write for the emperor, let alone a child of the Fan family. With this poem, it doesn't matter if Master Fan never writes poetry again. Crown Prince Jing sighed. The scholars by the lake were all silent. They knew that no matter what, they could not come up with a better poem today. So the entire poetry gathering sank into silence because of Fan Xian's poem. They did not notice that the author had long since slipped away. Actually, this poem was not suitable for the occasion, nor was it suitable for the occasion. But Fan Xian was really impatient, so he hurriedly recited a poem to defeat his enemy. Impatient, on the one hand, was because of that bastard Guobaokuan. On the other hand, he was really impatient. He had been bored earlier, so he had drunk a little too much wine. Holding his pants up, he came out of the bathroom and sighed comfortably. He fastened his belt, took a towel from a servant, and wiped his hands. On the way back, he suddenly saw a nursery that was growing very pleasantly, with tender green leaves and fragmented flowers. Under the tall trees, in the twilight, there was a sense of vitality. Fan Xian turned around and asked the servant if he could go take a look. Of course, the servant knew that this was the eldest son of Fan Manor. Miss Fan and young Master Seja had always walked around the manor as they pleased, so naturally they would not say no. They respectfully replied, "No problem." Fan Xian was a little happy. He sent the servant away and walked into the nursery himself. He casually looked around and found that this garden did not have the exotic flowers and plants that rich families liked. Instead, there were many plants that he did not know the names of. They all looked very crude and were probably wild vegetables or crops. He was a little curious. This King Jing's home was really different to have grown so many things. Walking casually in the garden, the sky was actually still very bright, but there were trees overhead, so it seemed more secluded. You could hear the cheerful chirping of birds returning to their nests above your head. Surrounded by green, it was very comfortable. Fan Xian was very happy to be rid of that boring poetry gathering. He hummed a little tune as he walked deeper into the garden. As he walked, he smiled and thought to himself, "I won't be like Duan Yu and meet a fairy sister, will I? Who are you?" A person stood up from among the plants and looked at Fan Xian curiously. Fan Xian was shocked. Even with his hearing, he had only noticed this person when he was so close. If this person was an assassin, then he was doomed. Only then did he realize that after entering the capital, he had become much less vigilant. He looked at the person in front of him and laughed at himself. Of course, this person could not be Wang Yuyan, nor could it be the white-clothed woman that he could not forget. It was a gardener in his 40s or 50s. He held a hoe in his hand and had a mud basket at his feet. His face was fair, but there was a slight panic in his eyes. He must have seen Fan Xian's clothes and was a little afraid. Fan Xian smiled slightly and bowed to the gardener. "I must have startled you. I'm a guest of the prince's manor and happened to pass by. I saw that the garden was well kept, so I decided to take a look around." The old gardener wiped his hands on his clothes, as if he did not know how to greet him. Hearing Fan Xian praise the garden, he laughed in a simple and honest manner. Chapter 70. Fan Xian looked around and found that there was no one around, so he simply found a rock and sat down. He took the water bottle the old gardener handed him and drank a few mouthfuls, casually chatting with him about growing flowers and grass. He basically knew nothing about this area, so listening to the gardener's exuberant explanation was somewhat refreshing. However, after listening for a while, he became a little annoyed. He wanted to leave, but when he thought of the poetry meet that was even more annoying, he gave up and sighed. Hearing the young master sigh, the gardener asked curiously, "Why aren't you happy? The poetry conference in the prince's manor is very boring." Fan Xian blinked at him, thinking that the gardener was only a servant, so there was no way he would be interested in the poetry conference. Sure enough, the gardener nodded solemnly. Reciting poetry is something only idle people do. It's not like they can earn a living. What a bunch of stupid pigs. Fan Xian was startled. Wasn't he scolding himself as well? Soon after, a thought flashed through his mind, and he laughed out loud. "You really are a stupid pig." He finally understood some things and waved off the matter of reciting poems. After the poetry conference was over, everyone went home or ran away. As for what happened next, it was not until the next day that the news spread throughout the capital. That night, At King Jing's manor, the crown prince had planned to go to the Drunken Immortal Tavern to have some fun, but he was invited back by the old housekeeper. He sat uncomfortably at the table, waiting with his sister for their father's lecture. King Jing sat at the head of the table. It was the old gardener that Fan Xian had chatted with that afternoon in the nursery. He looked down at his arrogant son and cursed out of nowhere. "You stupid pig! You only go to those places every day." Crown Prince Li Hongqing knew that "stupid pig" was his father's catchphrase, so he did not get angry. He smiled bitterly. "Why are you angry today, father?" King Jing snorted, but did not continue his outburst. He asked, "Did you have that poetry conference again today?" Li Hongqing was startled, then smiled bitterly. He knew that his father did not like the business of scholars, but he had to help the second prince win over scholars in the capital. To his surprise, King Jing did not get angry. Instead, he asked with interest, "There was a young man at the poetry conference today. He was wearing a light maroon robe. Whose family was he?" Li Hongqing thought to himself, "There are so many people here today. How can I remember all of them?" Imperial Prince Jing frowned, as if he was thinking about that person's characteristics. After a while, he said, "That lad is very pretty, like a girl." Li Hongqing chuckled. He knew who his father was talking about, and quickly replied, "You must be talking about the one in Fan Manor." Imperial Prince Jing raised his eyebrows and revealed a hint of ferocity. He roared, "What? You say he's Fan Jian's son in Danzhou? I'll F***ck his mother. How could someone like Fan Jian have such a beautiful son?" Princess Rojia blushed when she heard her father swear. However, she was also very interested to see what kind of person the man that Ruo treated like a teacher was. Li Hongqing looked at his father angrily, thinking that it was fortunate that there were no servants nearby. But then he thought about it and realized that the servants were used to King Jing's mouth. He quickly asked, "Father, why are you asking about the boy?" "Why?" Imperial Prince Jing snorted. After running into Fan Xian in the afternoon, who didn't know who he was, he thought he looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place him. And because Fan Xian disliked poetry gatherings, he was able to listen to him talk about the arts that he was most proud of. But he didn't expect that the pretty boy was Fan Jian's son. Anger rose in his heart, and he continued to lecture him. "You should learn from that. What's his name?" "Fan Xian. Learn from Fan Xian. Don't be fooled by his unorthodox background, but he has good taste." King Jing sighed. He looked at his son and lectured him. "Fan Xian is able to talk to a gardener for half a day. You, on the other hand, are too proud of your status. You should know that being proud is not suitable for what you are doing right now." Crown Prince Li Hongqing knew that he was on good terms with the second prince. Of course, he couldn't hide it from his father, who was outwardly loyal and irascible, but was actually very astute. After the meal, the crown prince was about to return to his study to read in order to cheer his father up. Unexpectedly, King Jing said after a long pause, "Weren't you going to the Drunken Immortal Tavern?" The Drunken Immortal Tavern was not a restaurant, but a brothel. The difference of one word was like the difference between heaven and earth. The crown prince's heart tightened, and he hurriedly said that he didn't dare. King Jing stared into his eyes and scolded him. "You're a man. If you want to go, then go. Don't be so irresponsible." Having said this, he called for someone to kick him out. Li Hongqing sat in the private room of the Drunken Immortal Tavern, holding the most popular courtesan in the capital, Yuanming. He was still thinking coldly about why his father had suddenly changed today. Late at night, in King Jing's manor, King Jing drank and cursed. That son of a bitch loved to go to brothels, and he actually gave birth to such a beautiful child. I'll let my son go there as well, so he can have a beautiful grandson in the future. Putting aside the matter of King Jing forcing his son to go to brothels, Fan Xian waited until the poetry meeting was over. He climbed into a sedan chair early and met up with Tang Zijing and a few guards. After the poetry meeting was over, everyone was talking about the Fan family's poem. Seeing the Fan Manor sedan chair, some scholars came up to bid farewell. Fan Xian hurriedly got down and sent them off with a smile. He then ordered the guards to take Ruo back to the manor. Before Ruo got into the sedan chair, she nodded to him. Fan Xian knew that the matter had been settled. His spirits lifted. He began to make arrangements for the evening. Guo Baoquan must be living in the manner of the Minister of State. He goes to the palace every 3 days or so. It's called editing, but in reality, he's the Crown Prince's study companion. Fan Xian frowned. How old is the Crown Prince this year? He needs a study companion? The Crown Prince is the Empress's son. He's ranked 3rd among the princes, and he's already 18 years old. Fan Xian laughed. Why would an 18-year-old need a study companion? Teng Zijing laughed bitterly. He's just having fun, so he's found some people to play with him. Does the Emperor not care? That? I'm not sure. After what happened in the restaurant a few days ago, Fan Xian was worried that Guo Baoquan would not be able to swallow his anger and would do something underhanded. So he ordered Teng Zijing to investigate, and found out where Guo Baoquan often went, as well as the route he took home. At today's poetry meeting, Guo Baoquan's words were sharp. No matter how good Fan Xian's temperament was, he could only keep a smile on his face. Deep down, he was still very angry. Only now did he realize that the reason he had asked Teng Zijing to investigate was because he was subconsciously prepared to bully Guo Baoquan, not because he was worried about being bullied. Chapter 71. What's the saying again? Fan Xian looked at Teng Zijing. Teng Zijing followed up quickly. I die. Nonsense. I get nothing out of your death. Of course I want someone else dead. You know what to do, right? Teng Zijing agreed without hesitation, even though he knew that beating Guo Baoquan in public would be a serious offense, not to mention Guo Baoquan's relationship with the Crown Prince. He was the son of a minister. If Count Sinan did not intervene, Teng Zijing, as the mastermind, would have to flee the capital for many years. But he still agreed without hesitation, because he believed that by following this young man in front of him, he would definitely be able to escape from this kind of mediocre life in the future. This confidence came from many aspects, including young Master Fan's knowledge, manner of speaking, and temperament, as well as Teng Zijing's intuition. Fan Xian nodded, very satisfied with his attitude, but said something strange. You don't know what to do. Teng Zijing was a little surprised, not understanding what the young master meant. I have to beat him, or else how can I vent my anger? Fan Xian smiled warmly, but this bright smile made Teng Zijing shiver, as usual. But I have to think of how to beat him. Who will beat him? How can I beat him to my heart's content without worrying about being flogged by the authorities? Originally, I didn't want to dirty my hands by beating him up, but if you or your family guards beat him up, it won't be easy to talk to the officials in the future. I believe Father won't offend the Guo family for a few servants. Fan Xian continued to explain with a smile. If I do it, my status is different, and the consequences will be much lighter. The marriage between the Fan and Lin families is imminent, and Father and the noblemen in the palace are determined to make it happen. They can't let anything happen to me. Teng Zijing frowned. Young master, you must not do it yourself. Besides, a fight between the nobles and the capital is a small matter. If you involve the master and Fan Manor support in the palace, it would be a bit. Teng Zijing stopped talking, but Fan Xian continued. A bit of a loss for a small gain? A bit of mischief? He smiled and shook his head. I'm just saying if. In reality, I'm not going to beat him and then give him a chance to bite back. Teng Zijing felt a chill in his heart. Was this young master going to commit murder? Fan Xian guessed what he was thinking. He laughed and did not explain. Have you invited Crown Prince Jing? He asked. Please. Where should I book it? Drunken Immortal Residence. The name of this restaurant is quite elegant. Young master, this is a brothel. Fan Xian was taken aback. He forced a smile and agreed. Have you prepared the sacks? To the west of the capital was the Lu Jing River. Before this river flowed into the Tsang Mountains, it gradually slowed down, forming a large pool of water that was as clear as a mirror. Every night, many pleasure boats would travel casually on the surface of the lake. The boats were decorated with lanterns and streamers, and they were as dazzling as crystal palaces. It was extremely beautiful. The commoners all knew what they did for a living. However, as time went on, not many people would point fingers at them. The Drunken Immortal Residence was not the largest of the brothels, but it was of the highest class. It was a two-story ship, exquisitely beautiful and elegantly decorated. Most importantly, it was the most popular girl in the capital's brothel scene, Sea Lily. Sea Lily's appearance and temperament went without saying. She was also skilled in the four arts of the zither: chess, calligraphy, and painting. She was also proficient in playing the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Although she did not have much skill, she had earned a reputation as a talented woman from the capital's talented scholars, intentionally or otherwise. Of course, this was not the only reason that had allowed this girl to rise so quickly in the capital's show scene and become the center of attention. To a greater extent, it was because of a certain rumor. It was said that Lady Lily's surname was not C, but Li, the surname of the royal family. The rumors in the Jianghu said that this girl was a descendant of the royal family at the beginning of the country, but because her ancestor had committed a major crime, she had fallen to this state. Those who truly understood the royal family would naturally scoff at such rumors. The common people actually knew that the news was definitely false, but Sea Lily never explained, so they simply went with the flow. In any case, His Majesty the Emperor would not care about the surname of a prostitute. This kind of mentality was actually easy to explain. Just think about the officials who worked in the court every day. If they knew that the wonderful person tossing and turning under them was a distant relative of His Majesty, they would probably be much happier. That was why the drunken immortal residence was very, very popular and very expensive, but it was still very lively every night. Who knew how many fools were willing to spend a lot of money to become Miss Lily's guest? But today, it was a little strange. The pleasure boat was anchored by the shore, but those young masters were not allowed to board. A few fierce-looking men were guarding the gangplank, and they almost got into a conflict with those people. Fortunately, the madam came down to explain, and those young masters found out that the drunken immortal residence had been booked by someone today. How much would it cost to book the drunken immortal residence? The young masters, who loved to take advantage of the situation, left resentfully. They couldn't help but secretly curse the person who booked the drunken immortal residence for being a spendthrift. Fan Xian looked at the exquisite pastries on the table and drank the fine wine handed to him by a pair of slender hands. He really did feel like a spendthrift. Although the money had been paid by Tang Zijing from the accounts office of Count Sinan's manor, and although his father was in charge of the kingdom of Qing's money, the accounts office of Fan Manor was like a small account office of the kingdom of Qing. But when Fan Xian thought of the amount of money he would have to spend today, he still felt his heart ache. Furthermore, he didn't know how his father would react if he found out that he had used public money to visit a brothel, so he felt a little uneasy. The source of his uneasiness also came from the girl in his arms. Sea Lily's eyebrows were like willow leaves, and her dark eyes roamed about. Her lips were like painted vermilion, and when they gently opened and closed, they naturally revealed a kind of charm. Most importantly, sitting in Fan Xian's arms, every inch of her body made Fan Xian a little dazed. Feeling the heartbeat of the handsome young master beneath her getting faster and faster, Sea Lily secretly smiled. After confirming that the young master of Fan Manor was indeed a fledgling, she stopped teasing him and got out of his arms. She poured him a cup of wine, brought it to his lips, and took a sip. Chapter 72. The boat slowly left the riverbank, and the girl slowly left Fan Xian. Fan Xian let out a sigh of relief when he saw the soft, wonderful woman in his arms sit down next to him. After all, he had been a virgin for more than 30 years. Suddenly encountering this kind of stimulation was a bit unbearable. Seeing his expression, Sea Lily was a little curious. In this day and age, rich and powerful young masters like him would have fooled around with the servants in the manor at the age of 13 or 14. It was rare to see someone like him. She had no idea that Fan Xian had grown up in Danzhou and had only had a few servant girls. Dong whom he had fantasized about, had long since married. Later, when he was about to fool around with Cici, he had been urgently summoned to the capital. Sea Lily looked at Fan Xian's handsome face, and for a moment she was lost in thought. She blushed and silently placed some food on his plate. This was the first time in his 2 lives that Fan Xian had entered a brothel, so he was a bit nervous. Naturally, he had no experience. Seeing that she was silent, he thought that the brothel girls of the kingdom of Qing served people in such a manner. So he said nothing. His left hand, whether intentionally or not, lingered on Sea Lily's waist. The atmosphere immediately warmed up. In another cabin, however, it was very lively. Teng Zijing was drinking with a few of his trusted subordinates. The brothel keeper stood to one side and asked if they wanted a girl to keep them company. The subordinates seemed to be tempted, but Teng Zijing coldly shook his head. They had been with the young master for a few days and had never had a chance to show off their skills. Today was a rare opportunity, and they refused to waste their time by drinking. Seeing his insistence, the brothel keeper did not insist. She had already given them the money, so she cheerfully poured them wine and chatted with them. The brothel keeper's surname was also Si, but it was obviously fake. Her first name was Ling, and she was no more than 30 years old. She was still attractive, and her words were quick and efficient. After a few cups of wine, she whispered in Teng Zijing's ear, "Sir, you are a handsome man. Which family do you work for?" This was obviously a probe, and Teng Zijing laughed. "When we made the reservation, we made it clear that our young master is the eldest son of Fan Manor." Si Ling smiled charmingly. The Fan clan is one of the 5 great clans of the capital. They don't have a dozen manors, but at least 3 or 4 of the most luxurious. Teng Zijing chuckled, but did not reply. Si Ling's heart skipped a beat, and he probed, "Such a generous person, it must be. Assistant Minister Fan's family?" Teng Zijing naturally would not deny that they were purposely going to the brothel today. He nodded. Si Ling was shocked. "So you are the son of Count Sinan?" She was still a little puzzled. Since he was the young master of Count Sinan, then the handsome young man sitting with her daughter in the rear cabin must be the illegitimate son of Fan Manor that everyone had been talking about recently. How could such an outsider's son command Fan Manor? So much money. Of course, she would not ask these questions. She only smiled and thought to herself. Back when she was grooming her cage and receiving guests, she had heard from her elder sisters that Count Sinan Fanjian was a frequent visitor to the brothels of the capital. Even after his marriage, he would often linger on the river. Even the censors had repeatedly submitted memorials to censure him. But because of his friendship with His Majesty, there was nothing they could do. Who would have thought that after 20 years, Count Sinan's son would once again spend a fortune on flowers? When she saw the young master of the Fan family, she knew that he was a beginner in this field. Si Ling secretly sighed in admiration. This was his first time seeking pleasure, and he had found the most popular girl in his family. This was truly a family tradition. As they spoke, a few red lanterns suddenly appeared on the riverbank. It seemed that someone was shouting something in their direction. The madam stood up, somewhat hesitant. Teng Zijing's eyes were sharp, and he immediately recognized the guards of King Jing's manor. He quickly ordered the pleasure boat to approach the riverbank to receive them. After Crown Prince Jing boarded the ship, he naturally went to the rear cabin. Si Ling's brothel keeper was shocked when she saw him. Why did they invite this young master? It seemed that young Master Fan in the rear cabin had quite a bit of influence. The Crown Prince's guard were familiar with Teng Zijing and went to drink. In the rear cabin, Crown Prince Jing saw Fan Xian's frightened expression and couldn't help but mock him. "Miss Lily isn't going to eat people. Why are you hiding so far away?" Fan Xian thought that if he hadn't come, he would have started eating people. "Why did you come so late, Crown Prince?" Crown Prince Jing, Li Hongsheng, was startled. Was he supposed to tell him that his father had taught him a lesson because of him? He chuckled. "You're from Danzhou, so you don't know the rules of the capital. You usually come out to enjoy the night view after you've finished eating at home." Enjoying the night view was a clever phrase, but there were no such rules. Fan Xian knew that, but he didn't expose him. He smiled and drank with him. Strangely, he and Crown Prince Jing had only met 3 times, including this time, but both of them felt that their temperaments were somewhat compatible. Crown Prince Jing didn't have the domineering air of a relative of the royal family, and Fan Xian wasn't as vulgar as other nobles. He was free and at ease in front of Crown Prince Jing, which suited Li Hongqing's temperament perfectly. After a few cups of wine, the two of them became familiar with each other. The Crown Prince seemed to be very interested in his life in Danzhou, and Fan Xian picked out a few things that weren't so strange, such as the mirage. There was only Sea Lily in the room, and she was a little restless. She didn't know who to serve. Although she knew that young Master Fan had paid for the boat, Crown Prince Jing's status was so noble. What if young Master Fan wanted her to serve the Crown Prince? Li Hongqing looked at the girl with a smile. Although he often hung out in brothels, he had seen Lily before. Unfortunately, he hadn't had anything to do with her. Seeing her troubled expression, although he knew that she was deliberately pretending to be wronged, his heart softened. He motioned for her to sit next to Fan Xian. Of course, the procurers wouldn't let the Crown Prince just sit there. She had already invited a girl from a nearby pleasure boat. Her name was Yuan Ming, and she was also a very popular courtesan on Lujing River. She and Sea Lily sat at the small table, one on the left and the other on the right. They were a fitting match for the Crown Prince and young Master Fan. As the wine grew stronger and the night grew darker, Crown Prince Jing and Fan Xian grew closer. They were both very satisfied with this meeting. Seeing the bright moon in the sky shift, the two looked at each other and smiled. They each took their beauties back to their cabins. The red candles gradually lit up. Sea Lily's eyes were like silk. She gently leaned against Fan Xian's chest, her fingers gently tickling his palm. Her breath was like orchids. Fan Xian calmly took out a wax pill from his sleeve and gently crushed it. Sea Lily smiled and fell asleep. The cabin was filled with the fragrance of the knockout drug. Chapter 73. The pleasure boat stopped by the shore. Crown Prince Jing stood by the side of the boat, smiling as he watched the group disappear into the night. Yuan Ming was in his arms. "Where did Master Fan go?" she asked curiously. The Crown Prince tapped the tip of her cold nose. "You still want to pretend to be innocent in front of me?" Yuan Ming smiled sweetly. "No matter what Master Fan went to do, he didn't hide it from you. I'm afraid Sea Lily doesn't know anything." "He didn't hide it from me. That means he's smart." Li Hongqiang smiled. "I'm just a shield he pulled along. But if he wants me to do it willingly, he can't hide it from me." He suddenly asked, "What do you think Fan Xian thinks of Sea Lily?" Yuan Ming seemed to be very familiar with the Crown Prince. After thinking for a moment, she replied, "Master Fan seems to like Sea Lily very much. I just didn't expect him to be able to endure this unrequited love and go do something else." She covered her mouth and laughed. It was completely different from her usual demeanor. "Then you should keep in touch with Sea Lily. Perhaps Fan Xian will come to the Drunken Immortal Tavern often." Li Hongqiang frowned. "Yes." Yuan Ming agreed, like a subordinate. She was curious as to why the Crown Prince was so interested in Fan Xian. Li Hongqiang put his hand into her clothes. Yuan Ming let out a soft cry. Her body almost went limp. "Do you know who Fan Xian is?" "He's the favorite illegitimate son of Minister Fan Jian of the Ministry of Revenue." Yuan Ming's voice was like a kitten's, but her eyes were very clear. "I understand. You want to control the kingdom of Qing's money." Li Hongqiang smiled and shook his head. "I don't have that ambition. I just think Fan Xian is a friend worth making." What he said was true, but there were some things he didn't make clear. Li Hongqing knew about Fan Lin's secret marriage, so he knew that the young man named Fan Xian would one day manage the huge business system behind the royal family. If the second prince wanted to compete with the crown prince, then money was the most important weapon. Guobaoquan was at a disadvantage at the poetry meet and was in a very bad mood. That was why he went to a party at night to ease his mood a little. Once he thought of his old-fashioned father at home, his mood became bad again. Just as he was planning what fun things to bring to the palace for the crown prince the next day, he noticed that the sedan had stopped. He wasn't prepared for it, and he didn't know why, but his head was a little dizzy. His forehead bumped into the front, and it hurt. He angrily cursed. "You bastards! How can you carry the palanquin?" No one answered him. It was quiet outside the sedan chair. Guobaoquan awkwardly climbed out of the almost toppled sedan chair and found that the street was quiet. It was Nyolan Street, which he had to pass before returning to the mansion. There were 3 masked men in black surrounding the sedan chair, and the Guo residence's sedan chair bearers and guards were already lying on the ground. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Guo Baoquan thought he had run into thieves who were robbing him along the way and was scared half to death. When did the security in the capital become so bad? Trembling, he shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" Niulan Street had always been quiet, especially at night. There were basically no pedestrians, and Guo Baoquan felt a little hopeless. He didn't expect anyone to come and save him by shouting, so he kept his voice low. A clear and gentle voice answered, "I'm Fan Xian, and I want to hit you." Guo Baoquan turned his head in shock, only to find a gunny sack flying toward him and covering him, so he didn't see Fan Xian's hateful, smiling face. There was a faint fragrance in the gunny sack, but it caused Guo Baoquan's dizzy mind to sober up a lot. However, this made him even more miserable because what followed next was a torrential beating. Punches and kicks were actually merciless. Fan Xian watched Teng Zijing and the others beat him and felt a little pleased. He just wanted to let others know that they shouldn't try to provoke him so easily, but he also had other intentions. Guo Baoquan was the son of a minister, and he had never suffered such humiliation and pain. But he knew that it was Fan Xian who was beating him. In a fight between the sons of nobility, there was no possibility of killing. Knowing that he wouldn't lose his life, he spoke harshly. "Little bastard Fan, beat me to death if you dare." Hearing this, Fan Xian was enraged. He waved his hand, motioning for Teng Zijing and the others, who had been beating him silently, to move aside. He walked over, squatted down, and gave Guo Baoquan a good beating. Then he spoke softly to the rolling gunny sack. "Brother Guo, do you know why I wrote that poem this afternoon?" Fan Xian's strength was great, and Guo Baoquan was in so much pain that he couldn't speak and could only whimper. "The wind is strong, the ape howls mournfully, the white bird flies back on the clear sand. Boundless trees rustle down, the endless river rolls in. 10,000 miles of sorrowful autumn is always a guest. 100 years of sickness alone on the stage. Hardship, bitterness, hatred, and frost hairs on the temples. Destitute, new and cloudy wine cups. You've bullied me twice, so I'm going to beat you until you're sad and sickly. Otherwise, how can I be happy?" As soon as he finished speaking, his fist smashed into Guo Baoquan's face through the gunny sack. He didn't know how he could be so accurate in the middle of the night, but he hit Guo Baoquan squarely on the bridge of his nose. Guo Baoquan felt a wave of pain, numbness, and itchiness rush to his brain. Blood flowed, and he couldn't help but wail and cry, begging for mercy. Fan Xian looked at the writhing gunny sack on the ground, and only then did he realize that his cruel and merciless side seemed to be slowly breaking free from the disguise he'd been hiding all these years. Still not satisfied, he kicked the gunny sack a few times, then waved his hand and led the 3 thugs behind him away into the night. He had come in a hurry and left in a hurry. Guo Baoquan hated not seeing him again. Half a day later, Guo Baoquan crawled out of the gunny sack, his body covered in bruises. Looking at the guards and sedan bearers lying on the ground, he couldn't help but curse and kick them up. Only now did he realize that his subordinates had been drugged, but that despicable Fan Xian had put the antidote in the gunny sack and beat him until he wished he were dead. The guards held Guo Baoquan's groggy head. Seeing their young master beaten into a pig's head, they were scared half to death. They rushed to help him up, not even sitting in the sedan, and carried him back to Guo Manor. That night, Guo Manor was in chaos. Early the next morning, Guo Baoquan sent someone to the capital government and handed the complaint to Mei Zhili, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Appointments and the capital government's magistrate. Mei Zhili complained about the previous night's tragedy and swore that the bastards of Fan Manor would be punished with heavy crimes, and that the audacious bastard son of the Fan family would not be spared. If even Mei Zhili couldn't punish him, how could he, as a minister, face? Chapter 74. Sea Lily felt like she was having a beautiful dream. In her dream, She had met her lover. They were doing that shameful thing under the candles and flowers. After a few rounds of it, she slowly woke up. What she saw was a beautiful face that she had never seen before. Only then did she remember what had happened last night. The young master who had held her was the handsome Master Fan. But she felt a little strange. Had she drunk too much? How could she not remember those details? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a little resentful. She knew that she had ultimately embarked on a path that she had always resisted. But when she thought of the memory of ecstasy that remained in her mind, she couldn't help but clamp her legs together and feel weak all over. Noticing that the man beside her had moved, Lily hurriedly pretended to be asleep. When Fan Xian woke up and saw her sleeping face, he couldn't help but hold her in his arms for a while. Satisfied, he washed up and left the boat, his hands still full of her fragrance. After a while, Lily opened her eyes and began to clean up the scene of last night's battle. She seemed to have discovered something, for she let out a shy and suspicious cry. When he left the pleasure boat, the sky was not yet bright. The Crown Prince was still sleeping in his room with Yuan Meng in his arms, so Fan Xian didn't say hello. He was in a hurry to leave because he had just arrived in the capital, and it wasn't convenient for him to sleep with a prostitute. Besides, the Guo family was about to make a fuss, so he prepared to go back to Fan Manor to watch the show. The reason why he didn't actually do anything with Lily last night was not because Fan Xian was a Taoist, but purely because of his mental and physical obsession with cleanliness. It was difficult for him to accept that another man had once touched a woman. In his previous life, he had seen a lot of STD prevention billboards on the streets, so he had a deep fear of venereal diseases. There were no condoms in this world, so there was no harm in strolling around a brothel. If he really did anything, it would be a little risky, but there were repercussions. Fan Xian looked at the indecent bulge in his clothes and sighed sadly. He regretted that he hadn't developed something with Cece while he was in Danzhou. When a sedan chair arrived at the corner gate of Fan Manor, the master and 3 servants sneakily called for the door to be opened. They slipped in and ordered the guard to keep quiet. Seeing that it was Teng Day and the young master from Danzhou, the guard didn't dare interfere and went back to sleep. Fan Xian went back to his room to catch up on his sleep. When he woke up, it was already bright outside. He dragged his wooden clogs to the front yard and heard the noise. He guessed what had happened, but he pretended to be confused. That morning, Mei Zhili was sleepy in his study when he heard the sound of drums. He was angry and thought, "Where did these unruly people come from? How dare they disturb my rest?" But the rules of the court were there, and he didn't dare to be negligent. He went to the court, and after a series of shouts, the advisor handed him the complaint. Mei Zhili's heart shook when he saw the complaint. Both the accuser and the defendant were not ordinary people. The accuser was Guo Baoquan, the only son of the Board of Rights Minister Wu Yu. He was now a palace and had some fame. The defendant was Fan Xian, the son of Fan Jian, the assistant minister of revenue. The accuser was Fan Xian's assault the previous night, provocation, and beating up an official of the court in the street. Seeing the 2 surnames on the complaint, Mei Zhili thought of retreating. The court was now divided into 2 factions. One supported the crown prince, and the other didn't reveal themselves, but secretly followed the second prince. Guo Yu, the director of the Board of Rights, had been the crown prince's teacher, so naturally he was on the crown prince's side. Fan Jian, the assistant minister of revenue, didn't seem to have any inclination, but he had always been on good terms with King Jing, and everyone knew that Crown Prince Jing was on the second prince's side. The case looked simple, but if it wasn't handled well, the Crown Prince and the second prince's factions would attack. Mei Zhili secretly cursed Fan Xian for not knowing the gravity of the matter. Fan Xian's reputation was gradually becoming known in the capital. All the officials knew that he was the illegitimate son of Count Sinan, who had been raised in Danzhou. Mei Zhili thought to himself, "You've been in Danzhou for a long time. How would you know how dangerous the capital is? You dared to assault someone on the street. I don't know how to deal with you." But the complaint was written clearly, and there were witnesses and material evidence. Mei Zhili had no choice but to delay. He looked at the complaint and frowned. He sent a document to Count Sinan's manor to arrest the people, while secretly sending someone to the Yamen of the Ministry of Revenue to inform Assistant Minister Fan. What Fan Xian saw was the bailiffs sent by the capital government to arrest the people. The Fan family had a close relationship with the royal family. For the past 10 years, they had been the ones arresting people. There was no reason for him to be the one being arrested. So a dozen wooden sticks had been raised, and the servants and guards assumed the posture of loyal protectors, eyeing the poor bailiffs like tigers. At the front door of Fan Manor, the bailiffs had no choice but to say nice things. It was Fan Xian's wish to arrest the people. No matter how arrogant the Fan family was, they had to let the people go to the Yamen. Fan Xian smiled and was about to respond when he heard a young man yell, "Where did these lackeys come from? Beat them all." The one who dared to beat up the bailiffs was none other than the violent young Master Fan Xija. The servants and guards heard the young master's words and roared. They raised their sticks and bravely stepped forward. But they thought of the fact that the man was a bailiff, so they didn't really hit him. They just smashed the sticks on the ground to scare him away. The bailiffs were furious. They knew the man was not to be trifled with, so they didn't bring a single one of the chains. They didn't expect to meet such a miserable end. "What are you doing?" At that moment, Lady Lu walked out gracefully. She looked at the bailiffs and frowned. She ordered someone to invite them in to watch some tea, then glanced at Fan Xian. Fan Xian shrugged his shoulders innocently. In the reception pavilion, a few bailiffs looked at the madam uneasily. With their status, it was impossible for them to receive such treatment under normal circumstances. They understood why the Fan family was being so courteous. But it was also because of this that the tea they were drinking didn't taste good. If Lady Lu became angry, how were they going to survive in the capital? After finding out what had happened, Lady Lu frowned. "That doesn't sound right. Our young master has been studying at home ever since he came back from the poetry gathering at King Jing's manor. Niulan Street is far from Fan Manor. How could it be our young master who beat up the son of the Guo family?" The bailiffs said awkwardly. Master was said it himself. Besides, he said in disbelief, "Did Master Fan really stay at the manor yesterday?" Lady Lu's soft gaze suddenly became two small knives. She glared at the bailiffs. "Do you think the Fan family would lie?" The bailiffs jumped in fright and quickly shut his mouth. But he wouldn't leave just like that. After all, the plaintiff was still waiting in the court. Fan Xian sat quietly to one side, but he was surprised. He didn't know why Lady Lu was speaking up for him. He actually didn't understand the noble families of this era. No matter how fierce the internal strife within the family was, once a foreign enemy came in, these families would always put aside their internal strife and unite against the enemy. Lady Lu took a sip of tea. She knew that the bailiffs had no choice and that there was no point in making things difficult for them. She smiled. "If the Guo family says we beat him, then we beat him. The affairs of the world are all about reason and human feelings. You can't just say that if they send in a petition, we have to obediently go and accept it. Although the Fan Manor is not very rich or powerful, we still have some face in the capital. I'm just curious, who was the one who submitted the complaint to the magistrate office today?" "It was the steward of the Guo family." The bailiffs hurriedly replied, thinking that the Fan family wasn't wealthy enough. There weren't many wealthy families in the capital. It would have been better if he hadn't said anything, but when she heard that it was just a steward, Lady Lu's eyebrows furrowed. She slammed the table and scolded, "Calling a steward to hand over a petition, and you want our family to respond? Didn't you say that Master Guo was beaten? How badly was he beaten? If you want to file a complaint, then file it yourself. Otherwise, I'll have my steward go to the Yamen every day to file a complaint. I'll accuse Guo Baoquan of using his power to bully people and take women. Whether or not my complaint is reasonable, you have to have Guo Baoquan wait in the Yamen." Before she finished speaking, Lady Lu had already called out, "Housekeeper Su." Housekeeper Su knew what was going on and stood up. "Yes, sir," Lady Lu said coldly. "Tell Mr. Zheng to quickly write a dozen petitions. From tomorrow onwards, we will go to the capital government every day. Even if we don't scare the Guo family to death, we'll tire them out." That wasn't the end of it. She smiled and explained to the bailiffs. Mr. Zheng is a guest of the manor, but I've heard that a few years ago he was your master's criminal lawyer. Writing petitions should be no problem for him. The guard thought to himself, this isn't scaring the Guo family to death and exhausting the Guo family to death. This is obviously a plan to scare the capital government to death and exhaust the capital government to death. Madam, please forgive me, he begged for mercy. This matter, it's not something we can do. After Lady Lu's long speech, she felt her mouth go dry. She reached for a cup of tea, but found that Fan Xian was already holding it out to her with a smile. Their eyes met for a moment, then quickly looked away. The bailiff spread out his hands and begged. Then what do you suggest we do? Lady Lu thought for a moment. She knew that there had to be a solution to this, and that it wasn't a good idea to keep wasting time here. She said, as for beating someone up, there is absolutely no way. Fan Xian added, absolutely not. Lady Lu continued, the Fan Manor doesn't quite understand why the Guo family would accuse us. Fan Xian pretended to be deep in thought. A few days ago, there was a conflict in a restaurant, and that Mr. Guo suffered a little. Come to think of it, it was my fault. Lady Lu was surprised. There was such a thing? Then it was your fault. But could it be that Mr. Guo held a grudge, and so he came to falsely accuse you? Fan Xian frowned and replied, probably so. Chapter 75. The bailiff interrupted their crosstalk performance and laughed bitterly. You can't be the first to say that. The Guo family's complaint clearly states that Master Fan held a grudge against them, which is why he blocked the street in the middle of the night. Lady Lu asked Fan Xian, what happened in the restaurant? I broke the nose of one of their guards. Fan Xian said, blaming himself. Are you all right? How could I be all right? Everyone in the restaurant saw it. I'm not one to be taken advantage of. Lady Lu sighed and turned to the bailiff. Listen, if you hold a grudge, of course you're the one who's taken advantage of. Our young master took advantage of you. How could he still hold a grudge? The bailiff had always been used to hearing litigators argue endlessly in court. He had never seen someone defend themselves before they even went to court. He was dumbfounded and didn't know what to say. Lady Lu extended her finger, and a banknote appeared in the bailiff's hand. He looked at it, and his eyes shone. Lady Lu had regained the dignity and nobility of a wife. She said lightly, we will go to the Yamen. We want to see what the Guo family is up to. But we can't go now. Go back and tell Master Mei that when Master Guo goes to court, our people will go there to confront him. One of the bailiffs thought this was against the rules. How could they go back with a banknote when they came to arrest someone? He was about to say something, but he was stopped by the young man, who said yes and hurried out of Fan Manor. Fan Manor was finally quiet again. Aside from Lady Lu and Fan Xian, there was no one else in the reception hall. Fan Xian looked at Lady Lu with a smile, thinking that it would be great if she wasn't his enemy. He had seen her methods today, and for some reason, he admired her. Although Fan Manor was a large family, they had been ambushed by the Guo family, and his father was not there. Lady Lu was able to handle the situation clearly, and not be at a disadvantage was a small matter. The important thing was that she had bought a lot of time to deal with the situation. As expected, Madame Lu took a sip of tea and faintly asked, why did you do this? Fan Xian smiled and said, Father has always hoped that I could quickly make a name for myself in the capital, and I've thought about it. Writing poetry and writing is really meaningless. If I can fight a lawsuit against the family of a minister, I'm sure I'll make a name for myself a lot faster. This was, of course, a joke. If you want to fight, then fight. Why do you have to reveal your identity to fight? It's as if you're afraid that it won't be troublesome. There was a trace of anger in Madame Lu's words. Fan Xian respectfully replied, I just wanted to vent my anger. If I don't let the person being hit know that I was the one who hit him, how can I vent my anger? Lady Lu glanced at him and felt that the handsome boy in front of her was many times more capable than her son, although he seemed to be doing some tyrannical things on the surface. Looking at his bearing and steadiness, she knew that he naturally knew what he was doing. She couldn't help but sigh and feel a bit disappointed. Fan Xian didn't know what she was thinking. He smiled and asked curiously, Auntie, why did you help me earlier? Lady Lu slowly raised her head. There were already some fine wrinkles on the edges of her eyes. She seemed to be surprised that the young man would speak so directly. After thinking for a while, she faintly replied, "Although my surname is Liu, I am a member of the Fan family." Fan Xian stared into her eyes. He knew that this woman's words couldn't be completely trusted, but he didn't know how to respond. It was so quiet in the reception hall that you could hear a pin drop. "Master Mei is my father's student. I've already sent someone to get the letter. Your father should have received the news by now. I'm sure nothing will happen to him. At most, he'll have to pay them a few taels of silver." Lady Liu closed her eyes, seeming a bit tired. "In the afternoon, have the housekeeper accompany you to the capital government. Tung Zijing followed you last night. Don't follow him to the government office today, lest you attract too much attention." Fan Xian looked curiously at Lady Liu's still beautiful cheeks. He couldn't understand why a woman with such a powerful family and such ability would be willing to marry his father as a concubine. By noon, Fan Manor had made all the necessary preparations. Everything that needed to be done had been done, and the paths that needed to be taken had been notified ahead of time. They had also sent servants to find out that Guo Baokuan had already been carried to the court on a stretcher. Only then did Lady Liu arrange for a carriage and a few servants to surround Fan Xian. Like a victorious general, they drove to the magistrate's office. Sitting in the carriage, Fan Xian didn't care much about this trip to the court. He had really beaten Guo Baokuan to vent his anger. The first time he noticed that Guo Baokuan looked at Ruo strangely, he had wanted to beat him up. Being insulted by Guo Baokuan at the poetry gathering in King Jing's manor had only made him more determined to beat him up. It was just that he had just entered the capital and caused such a ruckus. Although he had some tricks up his sleeve, he was still afraid that it would be difficult to clean up the mess later. But he still wanted to beat Guo Baokuan. Beating someone up was a means, but the key was to see what kind of effect it would have. Fan Xian wanted to beat Guo Baokuan for 3 reasons. First, he wanted to see what kind of power his father had hidden in the capital's bureaucracy, so that he could make arrangements for the future. His father had always been secretive about these things, and if he asked directly, he wouldn't be able to get a clear answer. At the same time, he could confirm some of the questions that Fan Xian had hidden in the depths of his heart. Second, he wanted to smear some dirty water on himself. No matter what, going to court would solidify Fan Xian's image as a hedonistic, tyrannical, and unreasonable son of a rich family. This was exactly what Fan Xian wanted, because he was carefully controlling a certain degree of goodwill from the palace. Although he had accepted his father's request to establish a scholarly side of himself, he had always been prepared to make his reputation known far and wide, so that the palace would take the initiative to cancel the engagement, all for the sake of Chicken Drumstick. The third reason was simple. Guo Baokuan really did need to be beaten up. Arriving outside the yamen, Fan Xian was startled. Looking at the excited crowd outside the red wooden fence, he was very puzzled. With the help of a few servants, he squeezed in with difficulty. Standing on the cool stone floor of the court, he looked at the painting of the red sun rising from the east sea on the wall behind the case, and the sinister sticks of punishment standing all around him. He thought to himself that he had arrived at the Beijing High People's Court, and that his trip had not been in vain. Turning around, he found that the people of the capital were even more excited than he was. They were desperately squeezing forward, wanting to get a better position. A few professional bachelors were almost sitting on the red fence. Fan Xian curiously asked Zheng Ta, who had been sent by Lady Liu to follow him. Many years ago, Mr. Zheng was a famous criminal teacher in the Jiangnan area. It seemed that he had a friendship with the current capital magistrate, so it was most appropriate for Lady Liu to send him. Zheng Ta smiled and explained, "The people of the capital are all brave. Don't be fooled by their appearance. They might be poor relatives of the Duke, so no one is afraid of anyone. Like today, a lawsuit between a minister and an assistant minister is indeed rare. No one will want to miss out on something like this." Fan Xian thought to himself, "Are you guys here to watch a blockbuster?" He shook his head, feeling a headache coming on. Zheng Ta quietly asked, "Young master, although we've already talked about this in the manor, I still want to ask one last time. Did you do this? Of course, I can't admit it in front of the magistrate, But if you tell me the truth, I can explain later. Fan Xian's face was full of sincerity. Mr. Zheng, I don't dare lie to you. I really didn't hit that master Hua. Zheng Tao looked at the handsome young man's kind and honest face and laughed. He gently patted him on the shoulder to show his appreciation. After a while, the shout that Fan Xian had been curious about finally rang out. The magistrate, Mei Zhili, came out of the back hall with a stretcher and sat down. After a while, a mummy was also pushed out from the back hall in a wheelchair. Behind him was a counselor who was waving a paper fan. Fan Xian looked at the mummy and couldn't help but laugh bitterly. He didn't hit him that hard, he thought. How could a minister's manner play such a pitiful trick? The mummy was, of course, Master Guobaoquan, who had been beaten up in a daze. His whole body was in pain, especially the bridge of his nose. The doctor's treatment didn't have much effect. He didn't know that Fan Xian had put some hidden strength into his last punch. The Jinqi in Fan Xian's body was different from the Jinqi commonly seen in the world. It was overbearing and fierce, and it wasn't something that could be healed in a short time. Guobaoquan looked at Fan Xian, who was standing in the hall like nothing had happened. His eyes, which were not covered by the bandages, showed a fierce expression, as if he was about to devour someone. Fan Xian pretended not to see this. He looked at the lawyer waving the fan and asked Zheng Ta in a low voice. Only then did he learn that the lawyer was the famous lawyer in the capital, Song Shuren. He had always been a bad person and only worked for the families of high officials. That was why he was known as Fat Mouth. The magistrate, Mei Zhili, who was sitting high up in the hall, slammed the gavel in his hand. The sound was loud and clear, and the noise inside and outside of the hall quieted down. The spectators who were leaning on the red fences were silent. After all, no one wanted to miss a good show. Who goes there? Mei Zhili asked slowly. He had already been informed by both sides and had a rough idea of what to do. However, he still had to act according to the rules. He glanced at the people in the court with an authoritative gaze. No matter who you are in the capital government, you have to listen to me. Chapter 76. Hearing his words, both the plaintiff and the defendant agreed. Song Shuren handed over the petition again. Mei Zhili pretended to read it, then handed it over to Zheng Tuo for Fan Xian to read. Fan Xian looked at it carefully and found it was not too different from what he had expected. He nodded and handed it back. Song Shuren cupped his hands and said coldly, I just don't understand. Why is Master Fan Xian standing proudly in the courtroom, not bowing or bowing? With such conduct, it's no wonder he did such a cruel thing last night. Fan Xian looked at the lawyer and asked curiously, You have to kneel in court? He had studied in Danzhou every day and was familiar with the laws of the kingdom of Qing. Of course he knew what was going on, and he asked on purpose, Of course, do you dare disrespect the majesty of the court? Song Shuren frowned as he looked at the other party. In fact, he was extremely unwilling to fight today's lawsuit. After all, he was facing the Fan family, a family that did not reveal their true strength, but in reality, many people feared the Fan family. But he had no choice. He had already gone too far on the path of being a minister. There was no turning back, so he could not refuse. Fan Xian laughed. Then why don't you kneel, Mr. Song? Song Shuren squinted at the young man, wondering if he was really an idiot or if he was pretending to be weak. He said stiffly, I have scholarly honors. I do not kneel in front of an official. This is the rule of the court. Fan Xian bowed to the prefect, Mei Zhili. Greetings, teacher. Should I kneel? Hearing this, Song Shuren knew that he must have scholarly honors. But he had investigated in the minister's manner, and this Fan Xian had clearly not taken the examination. How could he be a scholar? He patted his fan and asked, Master Fan, may I ask, when did you take the examination? Fan Xian replied politely, the year before last in Danzhou. This was something Fan Jian had arranged for before he entered the capital, but he did not know it himself. It was not until today's lawsuit that he realized he had unknowingly acquired the status of scholar. The matter of kneeling or not was put to rest, and the court case officially began. Both sides went around the main topic a few times, each expressing their own opinions. Guo Baokuan insisted that Fan Xian and a few guards from Fan Manor had injured him the night before, while Zheng Tuo insisted that Fan Xian had been in Fan Manor the entire night, with many servants as witnesses. As the fight began, the chatter of the commoners outside the capital city grew louder. There were more people who believed in Fan Xian. They felt that such a beautiful and delicate young master could not possibly be a murderer, and that Master Guo, who was sitting in a wheelchair and had been beaten to such a state, did not look like a good person. Mei Zhili looked down at the argument and was annoyed. He waved his hand to signal the crowd to stop. "Sir, if I may ask, the murderer is standing in the courtroom right now." Song Shiren wanted to gain the upper hand. He thought that the complaint was very clear, but the magistrate had not said anything for a long time. Perhaps he had already decided to side with the Fan Manor, so he quickly pressed forward. Zheng Tu smiled slightly. "Mr. Song, your mouth is a little too fast. Mr. Guo was attacked last night. According to the case report, someone put a sack over his head, and then he suffered such a tragedy. Since his head was covered before he was beaten, how could you see the face of the assailant? How could you determine that it was Mr. Fan who did it?" "Of course I heard Mr. Fan's voice." Mr. Fan admitted it himself. "Are you going to deny it now?" Song Shiren looked at Fan Xian mockingly. "As a man, do you have no sense of responsibility?" Fan Xian knew that Zheng Tao was trying to provoke him, but his face was calm. He was a little surprised, as if he did not understand why Zheng Tao was trying to frame him. Zheng Tao's voice rang out again, full of mockery. "Voice, I have studied the laws of the Qing Kingdom and have never heard of a case being decided by voice." Song Shiren was not in a hurry. He said slowly, "If voice is not enough to prove Mr. Fan's identity, then let me show you a poem." Having said this, he took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and slowly read out. Mei Zhili, who was sitting behind the table, was lost in thought. Suddenly hearing the poem, he became spirited. "Good poem, good poem. Who wrote it?" After saying this, he remembered that he was in the courtroom, not in the study. He was not at a poetry conference, but a trial. He coughed and had Song Shiren bring the poem up. He looked at it carefully and felt that the poet's talent aside, just his skill in refining the words was rare in the world. He asked Song Shiren curiously, "Who wrote this poem, and how is it related to this case?" Song Shiren asked. Song Shiren respectfully replied, "This poem was written by Mr. Fan Xian at the poetry conference at Prince Jing's manor yesterday. Last night, when Mr. Fan blocked the street and beat up Mr. Guo, he also recited these lines. He also said that he wanted Mr. Guo to do this and that." Mei Zhili was shocked. He looked at the young man in the courtroom, his face full of sincerity and a bright smile. He had never imagined that someone from Fan Manor could write such a poem. Hearing what Song Shiren said after that, he felt a headache coming on. You can beat people up if you want, but you have to recite a poem. How can a place of elegance be in a place like this? Now, the other party had a handle on him. Mei Zhili was a man of great experience, but the reason he had been able to sit in the key position of the capital magistrate for so many years was because of his ability to smooth things over. The capital was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, and there were many rich and powerful people. If he was only fair and just, he would not be able to stay in office for long. When he first entered the palace, Eunuch Guo had taught him 4 words of wisdom: smooth things over. From then on, Mei Zhili had adhered to these 4 words, and he had lived in peace for many years. So he still maintained this attitude towards today's case. He would not make any decisions, and it would be up to the 2 manors to negotiate privately. If it did not work out, he would drag the case out for a few days and hand it over to the Ministry of Justice. Since he was smoothing things over, he could not let the case become an ironclad one in his own manner. He looked at Fan Xian and Zheng Kuo with some worry. Zheng Kuo had been an advisor in Mei Zhili's yamen for a while, so he knew what his old boss was worried about. He laughed and said, "How ridiculous. At the poetry festival, there were so many scholars and so many people. Master Fan's poem was amazing, and someone copied it. It's not surprising that others know about it. More importantly, he looked at Song Shuren coldly and sneered. Has Master Fan lost his mind? He composed this poem in the afternoon, and then he went to beat someone up in the middle of the night and recited a poem while beating someone up? Not to mention how ridiculous that scene was. It was obvious who he was. Only an idiot would be so stupid. It was obvious that someone had a grudge against Master Gua, and they knew about the disagreement between Master Fan and Master Gua in the restaurant a few days ago. So they deliberately misled Master Gua into thinking that Master Fan was the culprit. The words young master, young master, young master made sense. But Fan Xian, who was standing to the side with a smile, heard him say that only an idiot would be so stupid. He could not help but cough awkwardly. Gua Baokuan, who was sitting in his wheelchair, could not help but curse. Don't try to argue your way out of this. This illegitimate son, relying on the power of Fan Manor, has no regard for the law. That's why he is so unscrupulous. Hearing the words illegitimate son, Zheng Kuo's face darkened. He felt that his young master had made a wise move by beating the man into a wheelchair. He said coldly, Master Gua, as a palace, you should watch your words. Although I know you are angry, you should not let your anger out. After all, you are close to the crown prince. It would not be good if you hurt the reputation of the palace. These words were meant to provoke Gua Baokuan, and also to make it clear that in terms of power, Fan Manor could not compare to the Gua family, who were close to the crown prince. What Gua Baokuan had said before was naturally untenable. As expected, the people outside the gate began to talk. More and more people believed that Fan Xian was innocent. Fan Xian's face was expressionless, but he admired Zheng Kuo very much. Some of the things he had arranged the night before had been used by Zheng Kuo. Nothing had been left out. Strangely, Song Shuren was not as anxious as Gua Baokuan. He smiled and said, Magistrate, my master is injured. Would you like to go and rest? Mei Zhili nodded and had the bailiffs lead the angry Gua Baokuan to the back. At this time, Song Shuren turned around and bowed to Fan Xian and Zheng Kuo. He said, so Master Fan does not want to admit to beating people up. For some reason, after Gua Baokuan left, Song Shuren's expression became a lot more flamboyant, as if the real battle was about to begin. Zheng Kuo and Fan Xian smiled at the same time and said nothing. What a joke. Niulan Street was so dark. Without witnesses and evidence, how could they prove that they were the ones who beat people up? Moreover, it was stated clearly on the papers that the guards and servants of Gua Manor were drugged. Even if they were asked to testify that Fan Xian was the one who beat people up, no one would believe them. Even Mei Zhili frowned. He called Song Shuren to the front and said in a low voice, let's leave it at that for today. Song Shuren cupped his hands and frowned. Master Gua is a compiler, and he was beaten up on the street. This is a big deal. How can we just close the case? Mei Zhili was angry. When did I say I would close the case? I'm only postponing the trial. The Gua family only said that they were beaten up. You have to show evidence. Even if Fan Xian wasn't a scholar, the capital's government wouldn't punish him. So it was basically impossible for Fan Xian to ask for help from the Fan Manor. Unexpectedly, Song Shuren turned around and asked, Master Fan, were you in the manor all last night? Zheng Kuo replied, yes, everyone in the manor can testify. Song Shuren laughed coldly. Bring in the witnesses. Only then did Mei Zhili realize that there were still uncertainties. He nodded, and the Gua Mansion's people brought a group of people into the hall. These people were dressed in different attire and had different occupations. There were people selling glutinous rice balls, night watchmen, sedan carriers waiting for business at the street entrance, and even a prostitute. Zheng Kuo frowned slightly, feeling that something was wrong. The onlookers were curious. What is this? Chapter 77. As soon as Song Shuren opened his mouth, everyone knew what was going on. These people were people who made a living on the streets of the capital at night. After Song Shuren's interrogation, these people respectfully confessed that they had seen the Fan family's sedan chair leave King Jing's manor yesterday. Instead of returning to the manor, it had gone to the west of the city. Then, in the middle of the night, it had mysteriously been carried back. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes as he looked at the scene. He somewhat admired the Guo family's ability to find so many people who had seen him in half a day. Seeing that he was not worried, Zheng Kuo was a little worried. He lowered his voice and said, "Later, even if you die, you won't admit it. Just say that these people were bought by the Guo family." Fan Xian sighed. Guo Baoquan was indeed beaten, and his injuries were so bad. Did they spend so much money just to accuse me? It doesn't make sense. Zheng Kuo did not expect the young master to consider things from the enemy's point of view, and was stunned for a moment. At this moment, Song Shuren's lips curled into a mocking smile. He looked at Fan Xian. "Master Fan, were you not at the manor last night? Why did so many people in the capital see you, but did not return to the manor? Dare I ask, Master Fan, what were you doing in the middle of the night on the streets of the capital? Why are you acting so sneakily?" The capital magistrate, Mei Zhili, frowned at Fan Xian, waiting to see how he would answer. The court was silent. Fan Xian sighed. There was a trace of embarrassment on his face. He smiled awkwardly, as if someone had discovered his secret. He quietly replied, "Last night, I spent the night at the Drunken Immortal Tavern." Everyone knew what kind of place the Drunken Immortal Tavern was. Thinking that this young master had spent the night in a brothel, his secretive actions seemed to make sense. The spectating crowd gave a collective, "Oh," in unison and roared with laughter. Naturally, some of the laughter was mocking Fan Xian. Mei Zhili heard this explanation and let out a sigh of relief. Song Shuren continued to smile. "The Drunken Immortal Tavern? May I ask if Master Fan has any witnesses?" "See, Lily can testify," Fan Xian said awkwardly. Song Shuren paused and suddenly laughed mockingly. "Is that so? But Miss C. Lily has already left the capital for Suzhou. This is too much of a coincidence. I don't know if someone is afraid that Miss C. Lily will say something she shouldn't." Fan Xian raised his head and stared at Song Shuren. Only now did he realize that the Guo family had used some unknown method to force C. Lily out of the capital. It seemed that they had been prepared. Seeing that he was speechless, Song Shuren was confident. He bowed to Master Mei and said, "Everything is clear now. Master Fan was the one who beat someone up first and then gave a false confession. I ask that you detain this criminal in prison and await trial." Zheng Ta, who had been silent for a while, suddenly smiled and said, "How grand are your words? Could it be that just because my young master went out at night, he has to be charged with such a huge crime?" Song Shuren pressed, "Since Master Fan is traveling, may I ask why you said that Master Fan stayed in the manor all night?" Zheng Kuo answered naturally, "Sleeping with prostitutes is not a good reputation, so I had no choice but to—" Song Shuren interrupted him with a smile. "Sleeping with prostitutes? Where is the flower now? And where is the willow?" He cupped his hands and said in a clear voice, "Master Guo and Master Fan had a quarrel a few days ago, and they were attacked last night. In their arrogance, they claimed to be Fan Xian. Master Fan didn't return all night and couldn't say where he went. May I ask who the real culprit is? Isn't it obvious at a glance?" Mei Zhili looked at the lawyer coldly, thinking that no matter how much you talked about this case, did you really think it was a normal criminal case? He couldn't help but look down on this famous talker. He turned his head and asked, "Fan Xian, do you have any evidence to prove where you were last night?" Fan Xian thought for a while and smiled. "Actually, I was fooling around with Crown Prince Jing last night. I don't know if that counts as a witness." Now that Crown Prince Jing was involved, there was no point in trying the case. Mei Zhili's face darkened, and he called for both sides to come forward. He said something in a low voice and announced that the case was temporarily closed. Fan Xian was to stay in the capital for investigation and was not allowed to leave the city. Naturally, the Guo family didn't agree, but the weight of this witness was too great. They had no choice but to go back to the manor and discuss it again. The bystanders of the capital found the case to be so boring. The minister's family and the assistant minister's family didn't make much of a fuss before it ended. They left after a hubbub. When Fan Xian and Zheng Tuo walked out of the magistrate's office, they were surprised to find Song Shuren waiting for them outside. "Master Fan, Song Shuren smiled and bowed. Fan Xian didn't know what he meant, so he returned the bow. Song Shuren said quietly, I owe the Guo family a favor, so I had no choice but to offend you today. Fan Xian suddenly thought of something and frowned. Did Si Lily really leave the capital? As soon as Song Shuren left the court, he looked at the young master with great respect and said yes. Fan Xian stared into his eyes and asked, Did you do it? Did the Guo family do it? Song Shuren was a little surprised. I thought it was Master Fan who sent her out of the capital. Could it be that you were really at the Drunken Immortal Tavern last night? Fan Xian smiled bitterly. Do you really think I was the one who beat Guobaoquan? At this time, the case had come to an end, but the words of both sides were still somewhat untrue. After a few words, Song Shuren turned around and got on a soft carriage, leaving the capital government's yamen. Fan Xian looked in that direction and asked curiously, You've already offended them. Why bother showing goodwill? Song Shuren is a smart man. Zheng Tu shook his head with a smile and said softly, Young master didn't say that you were drinking with Crown Prince Jing. Song Shuren almost scared me to death when he did this. Fan Xian smiled and said, Everyone knows that the court was just a formality. Why are you so nervous? Zheng Tuo shook his head and sighed. No matter how this develops, I've offended the Guo family. I'm going to offend someone eventually, so I might as well offend someone I can. Young master, your reputation as a prostitute, as a poet, will probably spread throughout the capital within a day. That's my wish. I wouldn't dare to ask. Impressive. You're welcome. In the depths of the palace, the yellow glazed tiles glowed gold under the sunlight, and the vermilion walls gave off a sense of oppression. In the garden at the back of the hall, a benevolent-looking old lady was listening to a female official beside her with her eyes half closed. In front of her were two noble women serving her. On the stone table was a mixture of exotic fruits and vegetables. One of the noble women looked dignified, with phoenix eyes and red lips. Her brows were full of care and restraint. She peeled a fruit and carefully fed it to the old lady. Empress, how come it's you? The old lady opened her eyes and saw the fruit she handed to her. She smiled and said, Let the children do these things. You're the ruler of the harem, the mother of the nation. How can you do these things? The noblewoman smiled gently. Filial piety must be done no matter what. This noblewoman was the empress of the kingdom of Qing, and the old woman she served was the emperor's birth mother, the former King Cheng, now the Empress Dowager. But who was the identity of the woman sitting on the other side? Who could sit side by side with the empress? There's no need to read, the Empress Dowager said quietly to the female official. You can all leave. All of the palace maids retreated, leaving only two old nannies. The Empress Dowager closed her eyes and rested for a while. She asked, What do you think of the Fan family's poems? The Empress Dowager smiled. I don't know much about words, but it sounds good. The Empress Dowager laughed. It's not just good. That one was full of envy, but the last one was 10,000 miles of sorrowful autumn is always a guest. It's not something an ordinary scholar could write, but seeing the Empress Dowager stop talking, the Empress Dowager asked, But what? The Empress Dowager sighed. But there's too much sadness in the sentences. And at such a young age, how could he write something so old? I'm afraid that the child is also a person with little fortune. Hearing this, the other noblewoman who had been silent all this time burst into tears. No one knew why she was so sad. The Empress Dowager hurriedly comforted her. Empress Dowager is just saying that. If Fan Xian really is a person with little fortune, you could just pick out some from your fingernails and give it to him. The Empress Dowager was also annoyed by her crying. Her face was full of displeasure. I only have 3 children. The emperor doesn't need to say anything. Although Li Ji is playful, he knows his fate. But you've been crying for decades, and you still don't understand. Really? After all, she was her own daughter, and her daughter had been miserable all her life, so she couldn't say anything harsh. The noblewoman sobbed. My child is already a person with little fortune, and the emperor wants her to marry the Fan family's child with even less fortune. What will happen to her in the future? What if Chun'er's illness doesn't improve? It turned out that this extremely weak, crying noblewoman was actually Fan Xian's potential mother-in-law, the unmarried eldest princess. The Empress Dowager finally couldn't help but scold her. Chun'er's illness is because you, as a mother, didn't give her any good fortune, and now you have a nerve to say such things. What about the Fan family's child? As soon as he said he wanted to give Chun'er good fortune, he brought the child back from Danzhou without a second thought. Not to mention that he's a poor child with no status, but just based on Fan Jian's love for the royal family, you shouldn't say anything bad about the Fan family. The serving girls nearby had long since left, leaving only a few old nannies standing with their hands behind their backs, as if they hadn't heard anything. The Empress Dowager's chest heaved with anger. The Empress Dowager hurried over to rub it. The Empress Dowager moved her hand away. Her tone softened a little. Besides, Chun'er will have to marry eventually. She's the son of a famous official in the court. Whoever marries her won't necessarily have a good life. This Fan, what's his name again? The Empress Dowager hurriedly reminded her. Fan Xian. Yes, Fan Xian. You heard what he said earlier. He is indeed a talented child. Being a match for Chun is not a bad thing. The Empress Dowager took a couple of breaths. And the Emperor has already approved this marriage. What's the point of making a fuss here? Chapter 78. The eldest princess was the former emperor's only daughter. After the current emperor ascended the throne, she was given the title of Eldest Princess Yongtao. Ever since King Cheng's time in the palace, the eldest princess had been greatly favored. However, her temperament did not follow the path of arrogance and domineering. Instead, she sank deeper and deeper into the sorrowful waters of a green lake. She would often become sentimental, shed tears over flying flowers, and weep over the eastward river. Of course, this was a personality trait that she would only reveal in front of those closest to her. She looked at the Empress Dowager bitterly and said, "My brother, the Emperor, could have chosen anyone else but the Fan family. He knew that the Fan family and the Prime Minister, all of you leave first." The Empress Dowager suddenly opened her eyes and lowered her voice to speak in a dignified manner. The housemaids were expressionless and quietly left the room. Slap! A red handprint appeared on the eldest princess's face. She looked at her mother in front of her, her eyes filled with fear. The Empress Dowager gritted her teeth and said in a cold voice, "How many times have I told you not to mention that person in front of me? You may be shameless, but the royal family is. If you had not protected him with your life, I would have killed that person long ago. All these years, I have never let him see Chun'er, but I have never placed any obstacles in his way." The Empress Dowager's kindness had long disappeared. Her face was frosty. "Because I know that when he wanted to marry you, it was because you were afraid of ruining his future, so you did not marry him. Fine. You wanted to give him a future, so I gave him a future. Now that he is the head of the officials, you should have fulfilled your original wish. However, I will not allow you to have anything to do with him. When it comes to Chun'er's marriage, the Lin family cannot have any say in it. Do you understand?" The eldest princess wiped away her tears and tried her best to smile, but her voice was trembling. "I understand." The Empress Dowager then turned around and looked at the Empress. "The Emperor is busy with government affairs. You should worry about this kind of thing. You should take care of your own children's marriages. However, since the Emperor has promised Chun'er to the Fan family, you should not interfere." Yes. The Empress had long been shocked by the scene just now, so she quickly lowered her head and answered, "Empress, don't always wait by Aijia's side. When you have free time, spend more time with His Majesty and help His Majesty." The Empress Dowager's tone was much warmer, and the encouragement in her words was very clear. The Empress smiled bitterly and agreed. Suddenly, she frowned as if she had thought of something. How could the Empress Dowager not know what these people were thinking? She knew that although the Empress Dowager didn't seem to care much, she actually hated the close relationship between the officials and the royal family. But she also knew that she had to act appropriately and that she couldn't say too much. So she changed the topic. I heard that on the night that Guobaoquan was beaten, Fan Xian and Crown Prince Jing were on the Lu Jing River, staying there. So this matter has nothing to do with him. The palace garden was silent for a while, and the atmosphere was somewhat oppressive. The Empress Dowager suddenly stood up and said, "I'm a little tired." Outside, the palace maids and palace maids hurried over to help her up, and a large group of people walked back to the palace. Seeing the Empress Dowager's carriage slowly turn around the palace walls, the Empress Dowager and the eldest princess stood up and looked at each other. The Empress Dowager's lips curled into a wry smile. It looks like even though the Empress Dowager is unhappy with Fan Xian's visit to the brothel, she hasn't changed her mind. I'm afraid that in half a year, Chen will really have to get married. The eldest princess sighed. I'm just worried about Fan Xian's character, but she looked at the Empress, and her expression was as delicate as a weeping willow by the river. The Fan family has a good relationship with King Jing. You should be careful, Your Highness. The Empress Dowager's heart trembled. She knew that the eldest princess was reminding her that if Fan Xian really did marry Fan Xian's daughter, and His Majesty really did hand over the palace treasury business to the Fan family, then the Fan father and son, one in the Ministry of Revenue and the other in the palace treasury, would have control over most of the Qin kingdom's money. And if the Fan family, because of their relationship with King Jing, were to fall in line with the second prince, then the crown prince. She frowned. Although her son wasn't much of a talent, he was still His Majesty's only legitimate son. Did His Majesty have a deeper meaning for this? Don't think too much about it. The eldest princess comforted her. You know that I haven't had much to do with the palace treasury these past 2 years. The Overwatch Council has always had people watching over it. After all, the Fan family's status isn't high enough. Even if Fan Xian really did marry Chen he wouldn't be able to truly control the palace treasury. The Empress Dowager frowned. Right now, I'm just wondering what that old man Fan Jian did to the emperor to convince His Majesty. The eldest princess smiled. You haven't summoned Lady Lu to the palace in a long time, have you? The Empress Dowager's expression turned cold. That woman married Fan Jian as a concubine. It seems stupid, but she's actually very cunning. 4 years ago, you suggested killing the illegitimate son in Danzhou, but Lady Lu took the lead. She must hold a grudge against us. I'm afraid it won't be easy to lure her out and use her as a shield. So what? The eldest princess smiled sweetly. Even though she was in her 30s, her skin was still very well maintained. Would she dare to say anything? Besides, I've known Lady Lu since I was young. I know she's someone who likes to get into a dead end. The Empress Dowager suddenly frowned. Come to think of it, it's strange. Why did His Majesty decide 4 years ago to let the Fan family manage the palace treasury? If it weren't for the urgency of the matter, he wouldn't have had to take such a risk. The eldest princess spoke softly. My brother the Emperor doesn't like my relationship with you being too good, so he decided to let me leave the palace treasury. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had the director send someone to guard me from the beginning. She then sighed. The court is full of civil and military officials. Whether they're good or bad, there's always a way to control them. But Director Chun is so loyal to His Majesty that he manages the affairs of the council so well that not even a drop of water can leak out. There's no way for us to send someone in. Hearing this, the Empress Dowager frowned imperceptibly. As an official, loyalty to His Majesty is a matter of course. We secretly sent someone in because we were worried that the Emperor would be deceived by a treacherous official. Director Chen's loyalty can be seen by the heavens. There's nothing more to say. The eldest princess knew she had said the wrong thing. She spoke softly. Yes, but these years, the Overwatch Council has never stopped investigating the assassination in Danzhou. It seems that His Majesty has given strict orders. Of course, when His Majesty saw your daughter after drinking, he was very happy. He took her in as his adopted daughter and assigned her to the Fan family. Only a few people in the palace know about this. The Empress Dowager recalled the scene from 4 years ago. She spoke coldly. In the end, within a month, there was an assassin in Danzhou. Although this matter wasn't brought to light, The Overwatch Council knew all about it. How could His Majesty not know? Naturally, he didn't care about the life or death of his illegitimate child. What he cared about was that someone in the palace dared to leak his words. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.